Well, Buenos and half a day, everyone. This oversight hearing by the Committee on Public Safety, Emergency Management, and the Guam National Guard is hereby called to order. Today is Friday, January 24, 2025, and the time is now 2 o'clock p.m. For the record, and in accordance with the Open Government Law, notices for this hearing were sent on January 16, 2025, and again on January 22, 2025. This hearing was also published on the Guam Legislature website and the Guam Public Notice website. Joining me here this afternoon are committee members, Senator Tina Rose Muñoz-Barnes, Senator Sabrina Salas Matanani, and soon to join us will be the Speaker, Frank Bloss Jr. Also, as well, my colleagues that are present as well, we have Vince Borja, Senator Vince Borja, Senator Therese Terlahi, Senator Shelley Calvo, Senator Chris Barnett, and Senator Will Parkinson. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us this afternoon. And before we proceed with the discussion, I'd first like to provide some general rules of conduct for those that are in attendance today. The conduct of this hearing shall be as follows. Written comments or presentations shall be submitted to the committee. Also, please provide my legislative staff with your written comments for photocopying. Comments may be read, and lengthy presentations should be summarized to 5 minutes. Those offering comments will be allowed to present written or oral testimony, and once you are done, please remain in the room for questions or additional comments as may be desired by members of the committee. Questions and comments shall be confined to the nature of the agenda today. And today's oversight hearing agenda concerns Guam Homeland Security, Office of Civil Defense, specifically the findings, recommendations, and corrective measures associated with an investigative audit which was released by the Office of Public Accountability in 2024. For the record, the reports covered in this oversight hearing include Office of Public Accountability Report number 24-07, published in June of 2024, Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense Operating Cost Series, Part 1, Investigative Audit, October 1, 2017 to September 30, 2023, and Office of Public Accountability Report number 24-12, that was published in December of 2024, Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense Operating Cost Series, Part 2, Investigative Audit, October 1, 2017 to September 30, 2023. The Chair will invite individuals whose attendance and cooperation were requested by the committee to provide comments, particularly representatives from Guam Homeland Security, Office of Civil Defense, the Office of Public Accountability, the Bureau of Budget Management, Research, and the Department of Administration. Before speaking, individuals who wish to make a presentation shall first be recognized by the Chair and shall state their name for record purposes. The order of questioning will begin with the panel of senators who shall complete their lines of questioning for each respective item on the agenda. Personal inference about the character or motive of any senator or any individual commenting is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the public hearing room for this proceeding. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form or decorum may be restricted from providing oral testimony and or may be asked to leave or be escorted and removed from the room. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present here in the public hearing room. This oversight hearing on Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense is intended for agency leadership to address the findings and recommendations contained in the OPA reports and to provide policymakers and the folks that are listening at home with sufficient details concerning corrective measures which have been implemented or are under active consideration. This hearing is designed to facilitate progress and not blame or confrontation. The committee is interested in getting to the heart of the very matter before us, which encompasses holding individuals accountable for disregarding established laws and regulations implementing and following through on corrective measures, and ensuring that Guam Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense will continue to have the resources that it needs to provide as required by local statute for the common defense and to protect the public peace, health, and safety, and to preserve the lives and property of all of the people of Guam. I would like to take a moment to recognize our speaker, Frank Bloss Jr., Guam's first Homeland Security Advisor, for consistently pursuing an oversight hearing on GHS OCD during the previous legislative term. Thank you, Speaker Bloss, for your leadership on this critical matter which affects the responsible use of federal and local emergency management resources. For today's oversight hearing, we will begin by receiving comments from the Office of the Public, or from the Public Auditor, with respect to Part 1 of the OPA's investigative audit, followed by then BBMR and the DOA directors, and then the orders of presentations will conclude with Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense leadership. Oh, let me also welcome my colleague, Senator Tello Tidegui. I didn't see you sneak in there. Thank you for being here with us. And at the very end. Oh, also let me welcome my other colleagues, Senator Chris Duenas and Senator Joe San Augustine, for joining us here up here on this. And Jesse Lujan. Good afternoon. So we will then have an opportunity for our senators to ask questions regarding Part 1 before proceeding with the same format for Part 2 of the OPA's investigative audit. We will have, just so we know it, 2 rounds of questions from each senator, allowing for up for 10 minutes from each senator for Part 1 and another 10 minutes for Part 2. So 2 questions each, okay? All right. I will now begin by recognizing those who were invited by the committee to participate in this oversight hearing. And can I ask you please to take a seat in the front here with the public auditor. Our public auditor, the Honorable Benjamin Cruz, Mr. Lester Carlson, Jr., the Bureau of Budget Management and Research Director, Mr. Ed Byrne, the Director of Department of Administration, Ms. Esther Agagi, the Homeland Security Advisor, and Mr. Charles Esteves, the Office of Civil Defense Administrator. At this time, I'd like to ask the Sergeant-at-Arms to please swear in the panel members, and if there are other staff members from these agencies who may be called upon by your leadership to help answer questions or provide additional information, please also stand and be sworn in at this time.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Chair, under oath, you may proceed.
Thank you. And if we can, this afternoon, I'd like to begin with our public auditor, the Honorable Benjamin Cruz. Thank you for being with us today.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize that I have no written comments to provide. We thought that the audit that we provided was our statement, and I'm not sure we could summarize it more than the highlights that we had in there. So rather than take up time, which I'm sure all of you have read, I'll pass it.
Okay, that's more than fine. Thank you. Okay, let me move on to Mr. Carlson. Thank you for being with us, Lester.
Thank you, Senator Gumataotao and members of the committee. My thoughts on the OPA's December report, their investigative audit. I believe members of the OPA utilize information provided by BBMR in their analysis of the overtime that this report generally covers. And the conclusions that were reached were common sense, well-founded, accurate. There, unfortunately, is a propensity for lack of proper management in this particular regard.
Okay, Lester, let me interrupt, I'm sorry. Let's talk about the first audit, which had to do with the general fund. Well, you can hold that if you like for the second part of it. But the first part of the audit, there's two parts. So we're going to start with part one of that audit from June, and that looked at the general fund use of funds.
I'd have to defer to Mr. Byrne on use of general fund funds.
Okay, but it's okay, then we'll come back to you on the second part. Okay, thank you. Mr. Byrne, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senators. Thank you. DOA is always concerned about the proper use of funds, and in particular, the ability of the government to recover federal funds where federal funds support a particular program. As senators may be aware, DOA, of its own initiative, started and completed an internal audit of the department itself. The findings of that audit, again, speak for themselves and can be found on the DOA website. Basically, the Department of Administration is concerned about the views of the federal government as to the nature of the funds expended and the fact that the funds were not fully, or the federal funds were effectively frozen and not fully recovered, and that it's sitting as a receivable on the balance sheet. The audit that's being undertaken by the federal government has looked into this. I think during the course of that audit, there's been a higher level of comfort with some of these costs, especially those which were not supported by documentation, but DOA has spent a good deal of time on its own to provide the documentation to the federal government, and that in itself has, as I say, increased the credibility and the ability of the federal government to feel more comfortable about some of these costs. It doesn't cover all the costs, but we're working away, and I believe, and I'll defer to my colleague over here, that we have until March to effectively provide all this documentation to the federal government. We, DOA, also have to cope with the overall audit. These costs were never included as a finding in the auditors, the external auditors' outside audit. I have discussed that with them because that was a concern to me, that a finding that the OPA could find was not highlighted by the external auditors, and they explained that individually each year the size of the costs being expended did not put it within their radar. I was concerned because I had indicated to them that it should have been in their radar, but nevertheless, that's one of the reasons why we instituted an internal audit, and indeed the public auditor took that to conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Okay, let me now move on to our Homeland Security Advisor, Esther Agagi, on the discussion on Part 1, Report number 24-07. Thank you, Esther, for being here.
Habade, Esther Agagi. I am the current Guam Homeland Security Advisor. Sidusmasi, Senator Gumataotao. Sir, respectfully request if I could just make opening remarks while I have the mic in front. Thank you. Hafade, San Minagov na haanin bueno. Chairman Gumataotao, any member in the Committee on Public Safety, Emergency Management, and Guam National Guard. We appear before you today guided by deep Chamorro values and the spirit of Inafat Maulik, making things good for each other, which has guided our island through countless challenges that have sustained our island through generations. Our ancestors faced challenges with both traditional knowledge and adaptability, values that Mr. Esteves and I both bring to our mission through our combined military and civilian emergency management experience. When I reflect on the journey of the offices of Guam Homeland Security and Civil Defense, I see an agency that began with procedures designed for quick emergency responses, urgent calls at 2 a.m., the rapid deployments during typhoons, immediate needs of our community in crisis. But like any organization, we have grown. Our mission expanded beyond just emergency response. The audit findings tell part of this story. They show an agency adapting to new responsibilities while still operating with systems built for a different time. Throughout my military career as an officer, I learned that success depends on rigorous after-action reviews and continuous improvement. In the military, we conduct thorough debriefs after every operation, no matter how small. We ask ourselves, what worked? What didn't? How can we do better next time? Mr. Esteves, also known as Lieutenant Colonel Esteves, drawing from his own military background, shares this commitment to systematic evaluation and improvement. This audit is our after-action report. Like a military debrief, it highlights areas where our tactics and procedures need refinement. And just as the military adapts its strategies based on lessons learned, we're using these findings to strengthen our agency's operations. The audit findings provide us with a clear picture of where we stand and where we need to go. And while we acknowledge the serious concerns about documentation and fiscal controls, we are already implementing improvements that demonstrate our commitment to progress. The complexity of our mission was unprecedented during the COVID-19 global pandemic. Our small team worked around the clock, coordinating multiple agencies, managing federal resources, and ensuring our community's safety, all while adapting to rapidly changing conditions. We operated the Joint Information Center for 1,147 consecutive days, demonstrating both our dedication and the strain on our limited resources. The scope of our challenges was unprecedented. During COVID-19, our operations encompassed coordinating daily with the Office of the Governor, the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and the Guam National Guard for medical updates. Managing multiple mass vaccination sites with ultra-cold storage requirements. Supporting our Guam Fire Department's sensitive mission of COVID-19 victim recovery. Processing thousands of travelers through the quarantine facilities. Managing the distribution of critical personal protective equipment across 60+ agencies. Supporting contact tracing operations for thousands of cases. Organizing multiple community testing sites. Facilitating emergency food distribution to quarantine families. And managing the complex logistics of vaccinating our homebound elderly and our disabled population. Then, just as we were emerging from the pandemic, Typhoon Mawar struck our island. With communications severely compromised and limited staff, we coordinated one of the largest disaster response operations in recent memory. Our team worked without rest, managing critical resources and maintaining essential services, often with nothing more than a handheld radio and manual processes. Not only did Mawar bring destructive winds and torrential rains, it brought new challenges. For instance, coordinating the evacuation of over 3,000 residents to emergency shelters, managing emergency communications with only handheld radios after 85% of cell towers failed, organizing water distribution to 65,000 plus residents, coordinating debris removal across 19 villages, supporting power restoration efforts for 52,000 customers, and managing the distribution of over 1 million pounds of emergency supplies. And behind every emergency response lies hundreds of hours of unseen effort. And while the public may witness supply distributions or shelter operations, they don't see our staff working through the night preparing purchase orders, coordinating with vendors, and managing complex logistic chains. During COVID-19, each quarantine facility required intricate coordination, from food service to medical support to security. During Mawar, every shelter placement meant navigating a maze of public safety requirements, resource limitations, and family needs. These behind-the-scene efforts, though essential, often go undocumented in the heat of crisis response. When faced with choosing between stopping to document a process or continuing critical operations, our dedicated staff prioritize the immediate needs of our community. And while this dedication served our people in their moment of need, we recognize that better documentation processes must be established for future operations. Each operation embodied our Chamorro values, the value of Inafat Malik, with agencies working as one family, the value of Tsensuli, staff giving their time and energy unselfishly, Geftao, sharing limited resources wisely, and Azuda, ensuring help reached those most in need. And today, with my colleague, Mr. Estevez, we're writing the next chapter. We're taking those hard lessons and using them to build something better. We're not just fixing processes, we're reimagining how a modern emergency management agency should operate. And to address the audit findings and strengthen our operations, we've implemented comprehensive technical improvements already, such as we've created standardized templates for fiscal documentation. We've implemented tier approval processes for overtime. We've developed comprehensive audit trail systems. We've implemented grants management procedures. We've created automated quarterly reporting templates. We've established regular reconciliation protocols, developed performance metrics tracking, implemented sub-recipient monitoring. We've announced monthly fiscal management training and learning modules for procedures. We've implemented certification requirements. We've updated some SOPs, and we've created compliance verification checklists. These improvements balance emergency responsive with fiscal accountability. We're strengthening our partnerships with DOA, BBMR, Office of Public Accountability, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency through regular coordination meetings, joint documentation reviews, and regular compliance checks. We're bringing the same discipline and rigor that defined our military service to our collaboration with our Government of Guam partners, both the executive and legislative branches, and our federal stakeholders. This means implementing clear chains of command for fiscal decisions, establishing robust documentation protocols, and ensuring transparency in all our operations. We're not just fixing problems. We're building a more resilient agency worthy of our community's trust. And this isn't just about compliance. It's about honoring our commitment to the people of Guam who trust us to be there in their most vulnerable moments. Every dollar we manage more effectively means better service to our community. Every process we improve strengthens our ability to respond when our island needs us most. We're bringing the best practices from our military experience, the emphasis on preparation, the importance of clear procedures, and the commitment to continuous improvement to transform how we serve Guam. This audit provides the roadmap for that transformation. We appreciate the committee's oversight and guidance. Our mission of ensuring Guam's safety and security is strengthened through sound fiscal stewardship and accountability. We're ready to turn this page together, applying the lessons learned from our military service and this audit to build an agency that better serves our island community. Por favor, baba ipetta, polo ihinasu, adzudaham kilistano. Sendunkaluna sidus maasi. Mr. Stavis and I are available to address your questions and provide additional information about our improvement initiatives.
Thank you, General. Mr. Esteves.
Good afternoon, Speaker Blas, to our chairperson, Senator Gumataotao, and members of the committee. So I'm going to read from my prepared remarks, and then I have just a short presentation just to highlight some of the points that we're going to be talking about today. So first, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the findings and processes related to our offices. Today's hearing offers a unique opportunity to review and reflect on the processes that guide our agency. And from my understanding, this is the first hearing of the year and this body. So I'm very thankful to be front-loaded and go through the process that's really going to help to define our relationship for this year to come and the next 2 years to come. So we view these audits, as the HSA said, as significant after-action reviews, an honest assessment designed to improve, evolve, and align with the expectations of our stakeholders and our major federal partner, FEMA. We remain process-focused and committed to continuous improvement. Our approach is grounded in transparency, accountability, and collaboration. Challenges encountered during emergency operations have been met with a proactive mindset and corrective actions to strengthen operational readiness and execution. We acknowledge the findings within the audit and understand the importance of addressing these areas to enhance our operations. These findings allow us to identify gaps, implement corrective measures, and we recognize the importance of quantifying our efforts and improving clarity on roles and responsibilities, articulating the impact of our mission to stakeholders and the public. But the process is not without its complexities. But I can assure you that we're dedicated to aligning all our activities for our overarching missions to protect and serve the people of Guam. While this hearing addresses findings and recommendations, it's essential to note that our efforts are like an orchestra, often invisible, but integral to the seamless execution of emergency management. It reflects our commitment to working as a cohesive team and prioritizing results and efficiency over individual visibility. I do want to recognize our close coordination with FEMA, the Office of Public Accountability, and other partners as we work to address identified challenges. As part of my opening remarks, I have a presentation highlighting the pivotal role of the Emergency Operations Center and the Emergency Manager. Thank you all for this opportunity to speak and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. Esteves. Do you want to go ahead and do your presentation now?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, go for it.
All right, next slide, please. So the agenda is simple. And really, this is also for the public to understand what the role of the Emergency Operations Center is and the role of the Emergency Manager. I have some cousins that think I'm the weatherman. right? Or I'm the earthquake guy, or I'm just a guy that just knows stuff and I work in the Joint Information Center. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of misperceptions of what emergency managers actually do. And so it's just like this opportunity to just kind of tell our story. Additionally, we've included corrective action plans for both the Part 1 and Part 2 of the OPA audits. We've also included, which is primarily related to Part 1 and has some parts of Part 2, is our corrective action plan to FEMA, addressing their 13 findings. And you'll find that a lot of the findings, especially in Part 1 of the audit, share that relationship with the FEMA Premier Group audit. All right, so next slide. All right, so this is very simple. This is what we do. We share information, we coordinate resources, and we basically do the operational coordination for all emergencies and disasters. And while we're doing that, we are developing both short and long-term response and recovery plans. So while everyone is for the most part, response-focused, and once the power goes on and the roads are cleared, everyone thinks that we are recovered. But the recovery process is long. With some of the projects that we have, recovery takes up to 5 years. I can tell you that in places like Louisiana, they're still recovering from Hurricane Katrina. And that's what true recovery is. Next slide. This looks crazy. But what you see on the left are the end users, the stakeholders, government agencies, people. And what they do is they feed through the Emergency Operations Center their request. It could be a request for resources, a request for assistance, or a request for information. They need updates on what's going on. And we provide them that updates because we see the entire picture. We provide them updates so they can better do their job, the actual people on the ground on the incident. Sometimes you have complex incidents like COVID-19, where it's not simply one, first responders on the ground, comparing it to, say, a fire, where you just have the Guam Fire Department out there. During COVID-19, we needed a whole of government, whole of community approach to combat this emergency. Now, what you see there on the right, those are people in the EOC. So they process these requests, and they go face-to-face and communicate with one another. Now, you can imagine that during a disaster like COVID-19, you had people that were afraid to go to work. You had people that did not want to be in close proximity to another. We had in the Emergency Operations Center, for those of you who've been there, you saw how tight it is. 6 feet or how many, whatever the mandatory social distancing didn't work there. We didn't have the partitions that we had today. And so what they're doing is they're doing their best to resource whatever the requests may be. And those are icons out there. Those are not actual requests, right? But I can tell you that their requests range. They range from simple medical supplies all the way to something as big as a bucket truck that we may not have on island. Where during Typhoon Mawar, we actually had to source, FEMA had to source from another state and get it here through military gray tail. Next slide. Next slide, please. So where do we get these resources? First, we look within the government of Guam for our organic assets. And I could tell you that when it comes to a lot of the things we need for an emergency, we just don't have within the government of Guam. Now, people say, just ask FEMA. Asking FEMA is the last thing we do, and FEMA will tell you this as well. Because we only go to FEMA when we've exhausted all on-island resources, and we've done everything as a government to get these resources. And so then we go to emergency procurement. And this is where you do the market research. This is where you go to vendor selection, contracting, and awarding. And although it's emergency procurement, as we've seen during COVID-19, it could be a very slow process to ensure that we have everything done correctly. Then finally, when we've exceeded that, we go to FEMA. During emergencies, people say, let's just get the resources out of the FEMA warehouse. What people don't understand is that every single bottle of water or MRE, the government of Guam pays for at a cost share. And I can tell you that FEMA bottled water versus Payless bottled water is very expensive, a lot more expensive. And so while we always say, let's just go to FEMA, that seems to be the easiest solution, it's actually a very costly solution, and we try to avoid it if possible. And you see there those documents, those are the different contracts, and that's what we use to get the supplies. Next slide. Even if we manage to find the supplies, because during an emergency, you have vendors that are closed, you have people that are out because the public can procure goods and services faster than the government. We still have to worry about staging and warehousing. We have to worry about transportation and distribution. And distribution, next slide. Even if we manage to distribute it or to get the goods and distribute it, we have to ensure that we have the right material handling equipment on the ground. True story, during Typhoon Mawar, not all mayors had material handling equipment, which means that their staff had to offload pallets of water and food. And finally, it gets to the end user. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that the people that do this process cradle to grave is your emergency manager. And with a staff of about 6 or 7 classified employees, we are doing the work that a lot of other jurisdictions have, I want to say 3 to 5 more people than we do. Next slide. All right, so we use a system. We have a system record called Disaster Land, or DLAN. And the Guam legislature has a response activity coordinator. They do have access to DLAN if need be, and you're welcome to view any individual ticket, and also to make tickets yourself during any sort of disaster and emergency. But I want to actually show you what an actual ticket looks like. Next slide, please. So this is the actual system. During COVID-19, we processed 1,972 tickets. 1,972 tickets. And if you go to the next slide, this is one of the first tickets. I didn't show you the first ticket because the first ticket is 300-some pages long and actually included a copy of the pandemic response plan from Public Health for everyone. But if you look at it, look at the start date of that, March 14th. March 14th. And this is the first page of the ticket. Okay, and those are different supplies requested. And you can see it's a story. This is communication between multiple people. This is at the agency level within our organization. This ticket was opened by one of our classified members, Ken Artero. Next slide. Oh, and you can see the time was 17:59, right? 5:59. So it's after 5 p.m. Next slide. Now, we closed this ticket May 29, 2021, months after it originally opened. And if you see before this, there are tons of additional requests added. There's conversation showing what we closed out in terms of resources. But we closed this ticket because at the skilled nursing facility, there is no longer a need for any sort of supplies. But this is one ticket. So imagine this process multiplied 1,900 times. And you can imagine most of the tickets look like this. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you what's in that same ticket. These are emails to vendors. This is the market research. Those are logs, contact logs. So there is a lot of work that goes into a single request for assistance. This is a single request. Remember, a single request. And the number of people actually in DLAN tracking and processing, it's about 2 to 3 people of the staff. 2 to 3 people over the course of almost 2 years worth of tickets processing these. Next slide. This is Mawar. Shorter event, 1,636 tickets. And the reason why this is more tickets is because these are individual requests for either debris clearance, chainsaws, whatever supplies we need, versus COVID, where some of the agencies decided for a single operation to continue on the ticket. If they actually did individual requests for supplies and tickets, you can imagine the number rising. Next slide. And so we're welcome, Mr. Chairman, to go through whatever corrective action plan. We can continue on with the round of questions. Next slide, please. But what you're going to see in these next slides is basically our corrective action plan and our management response to OPA. What's highlighted in green are things that we've already closed out and addressed. And we didn't just address it within this, but this is work contributed. Next slide, please. This is work contributed to the FEMA audit. And right here you can see, and I have a slide for every single finding, and what you're going to see here is our corrective action measures that we've worked with FEMA on, either clarifying, a little bit of wordsmithing, and just making sure that it's feasible to implement. I'm going to be honest. A problem that we saw with our SOPs is that they're very fat plans. A lot of the SOPs we developed in 2015, I think some of the staff, you either need probably a bachelor's degree or a master's degree to kind of understand it. And so now what we're working on are very short, simplified SOPs. So when you have someone that's not an emergency manager come into the agency, that they can understand it, we can brief it, it's teachable and it's trainable. I'm pretty sure throughout your experience, and everyone in this body can agree, that there are a lot of SOPs that you've seen that people just don't read because they're just too hard to understand, they're too lengthy. And so we really want to get away from fat plans and work towards very simplified set of instructions that can take anyone from point A to Z. So I'll leave these slides. Any documents that we sent to FEMA for the corrective action plan, I'm welcome to provide them to this body if need be. And I stand by for any further questions. Thank you.
So thank you so much. So I guess the next slide would be your part two, correct?
The next section, yes, it'll be the part two.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and begin if I could, and let me just start with, as of February 16th, 2024, the Department of Administration reported that Guam Homeland Security and Civil Defense owed $8.4 million to the general fund for unreimbursed expenditures. OPA report number 24-07 stated that the general fund paid $71.3 million in expenditures under the GHS OCD operations, FEMA recovery, and tsunami grant programs, and was only reimbursed $62.9 million by FEMA. Now, the report further mentioned that since the general fund was owed $8.4 million, a determination was needed for whether the general fund will be reimbursed by federal funds. So my question, if I can, either to Mr. Byrne or to Lester, as of today, was the general fund reimbursed $8.4 million or any portion of this amount? And if not, what steps must be taken to have this expense fully covered by federal funds?
Thank you, Senator. I'm not entirely sure of all the numbers, but a very small portion of that amount has been reimbursed to the general fund. The reimbursement depends upon the results of the audit that's being undertaken that I mentioned earlier, and it's certainly our expectation that when that's complete and the missing documentation and what other information Homeland felt that they were missing will free up those funds.
Anyone else? So absent the reimbursement from the federal government, and if local funds were used to cover these expenses, which general fund or special fund supported agency or program was impacted to cover these costs?
The general fund is the general fund. The general fund in any jurisdiction is ultimately responsible for any shortfall in any other fund, and that was the case here.
I have a couple more questions if I can. So also OPA report number 2407 conveyed that based on the appropriations laws from fiscal year 2018 to fiscal year 2023, that the Office of the Governor's budget request did not include Guam Homeland Security and Office of Civil Defense, even though the entity was a program listed one. Now, the report detailed that the appropriations law for these fiscal years allowed for the governor to transfer appropriations from her office, for example, to only GHS, not GHS and OCD, for matching federal grants. However, if Homeland Security and Civil Defense staff are 100% federally funded, a local fund match of equal amount would be 100%. Now, so for the record, what exactly were the agreed upon grant requirements between the federal government and the government of Guam as a condition for receiving GHS OCD funding from the federal government? Some examples could be a local appropriation, shared costs for employee salaries and benefits, vehicles and other equipment and supplies, utilities and or indirect costs.
Thank you, Senator. I'll begin. With most federal grants, we front the initial cost, say, for example, personnel costs on a biweekly basis, and then the Department of Administration would then submit through the federal portal for reimbursement from the grants that are already approved for the operations of, in this case here, Homeland Security's Office of Civil Defense. So we always, almost in every case, have to front the money and then justify through submission of timesheets and other documentation for reimbursement.
Okay, so we're recognizing that federal reimbursement to GHS and OCD were either delayed or denied altogether, which compelled the local government to cover certain costs from GHS and OCD, totaling $8.4 million. What is BBMR doing to incorporate these costs, if necessary, in future budget requests beginning with fiscal year 2026?
We do not plan to put any general fund subsidy for Homeland Security. I sit in on the Corrective Action Plan virtual meetings, as Mr. Esteves stated. They have begun, and we're looking at wrapping up by March. So there's been a reinstatement of 2 particular grants that were previously withheld. So they are making headway in being able to reestablish and get the support from FEMA for utilization and the ability to draw down on those grants. As Mr. Esteves also mentioned, a lot of times recovery takes a long time. We have 5-year windows that came and closed on grants that they previously had, and they're noted in the audit, that we stood to lose, and we did, because we were unable to fully document some of the expenses and charge against those grants. Those were like in 2019. We are making significant progress from where we were. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I don't disagree whatsoever with the statements made by the Homeland Security Advisor and the Administrator of Homeland Security that when it comes to responding to an emergency, bar none, we do a great job. I don't think that the abilities of Homeland Security and the response of Homeland Security are in anybody's, a concern of anybody's. That's not anything that is being questioned here. The evolution of the mission, though, requires more astute fiscal discipline. I will give you all the accolades in the world because you deserve them for emergency response. But from where we sit, particularly since we have to expend local monies and get them reimbursed, and all of a sudden when the spigot is turned off, then we have a problem.
Thank you. I have just a couple more questions and then I'll defer to my colleagues. So OPA report number 24-07 stated that FEMA conducted monitoring visits in 2020, 2022, and 2024 on GHS OCD's accounting of grant funds, document policies and procedures and expenditures. The report cited a separate audit that we talked about just a couple of minutes ago from the Premier Audit Group Services, which was contracted by FEMA and that Mr. Esteves mentioned earlier. Now, in the audit, auditors were unable to confirm or verify the costs that were incurred by GHS OCD, as well as determine whether the costs were allowable or allocable. So regarding a 2018 Transition Committee report cited in OPA report number 2407, the committee stated that fiscal contingency should be considered to identify alternate sources of funding should federal funding be delayed, held, decreased, or become unavailable. So also, OPA report number 2407 further stated that repeat findings of non-compliance stem from the lack of consistent leadership and qualified fiscal and grants management teams. So to clarify, has a determination been made by the federal government on whether the government of Guam needs to cover $34.7 million in question costs?
At this time, the answer is no.
Okay, and with respect to the broader issue of GHS OCD's management of grants, what steps have been taken to improve compliance through the recruitment and retention of qualified fiscal and grants management personnel?
I think that was covered in Mr. Esteves' recap of the corrective action plan, sir, and it's an ongoing effort.
All right, thank you so much, Lester. Okay, now I'm going to move to my colleagues, and I'll begin with our speaker, Frank Bloss, Jr.
If I may...
Oh, sorry, please, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the Premier Audit, let's be clear. They didn't talk to Mr. Byrne. They didn't talk to me. There was a section there on travel. Okay, we have a very robust, very solid SOP for travel, but nobody asked me. So all the question costs that pertain to travel, we pulled out all the travel authorizations. We covered every single quote-unquote question cost, and we have all the hard copies waiting in a box, sitting in a box, and we made FEMA well aware of this. There was one particular finding which I thought was totally absurd. It referred to an employee who wasn't even working for the agency going to Maryland, and made it seem like we picked somebody off the street and sent them to Maryland. Well, we found the TA. The person was indeed working at Homeland Security at the time, and she went to Maryland to attend a FEMA conference. So some of the stuff that's there, it's kind of like, you know, if there was an in-depth review with Mr. Byrne on the DOA side for purchases and invoices, I think a lot of that stuff could have been scrubbed. So from my perspective, every reference to travel and question costs, it's not, you know, it's not an issue at all. It is not an issue. We have the documentation. And I stressed that with FEMA a couple times on these corrective action calls. We don't need to go down that road.
Okay, noted. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the panel for being here. To start, I appreciate Mr. Carlson. I think you can agree with me because you said that they didn't talk to you. There was also the finding that Homeland Security, Civil Defense didn't have the documents. And if they didn't have the documents, nobody went to go look for it with you guys, right? Because it was there. Thank you. Anyways, so we're going to stick with the first one. First off, Mr. Esteves, Ms. Aggie, thank you very much for your presentation. And you know, as I'm getting to the presentation, you have this old saying that I use a lot, and I was wondering what it had to do with the price of Tang and Happy Mart. I appreciate the operations and as far as the presentation about the operations during emergency management. However, I'll start with either one of you. What are the grant programs that you have at Office of Homeland Security, Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense? What are those grants?
Speaker, thank you for that question. So the programs, the federal grant programs that I manage are three. It is the Homeland Security Grant Program, then there's also the Cybersecurity Program, and then there's the nonprofit security programs that I manage as the Homeland Security Advisor. And then Mr. Estevez manages, I think, 3 or 4 others, and I'll let him explain it.
Yeah, so the grant programs I manage is the Emergency Management Performance Grant Program, BRIC, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities, and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Additionally, there is another grant that's not a FEMA DHS grant. This is a NOAA grant. This is the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Grant.
Okay, so along those lines, in your presentation, in the times of disaster, which one of those grants are being used to handle the disaster? Or is there another grant?
None. These grants are non-disaster grants.
Non-disaster grants, yet your presentation was about a disaster.
Correct.
Okay? So this forum and this hearing is about those other grants, not the disaster grant. We need to make that very, very clear here. Okay? Speaker BJ, Chief BJ, thank you very much for being here. And I know you don't have the documents here. I'm going to have to, you know, rely on the information that you got stuck in your brain. What brought the OPA into this picture? With regard, and we're talking specifically about Part 1, your finding of the $8.4 million in question costs. How do we get here? How did you get to having to have to conduct an audit?
Being fully transparent, it was a meeting in your office. You sent me a text and asked if I could come up. And when I came up, a whistleblower was there, and you said, I don't think I can handle this alone. You're going to have to help, or you're going to have to take it over. And so I took the information from the whistleblower, and that's where it started. At that point, we were advised by the whistleblower that there was a federal external auditor, a private audit firm, had come to Guam and had done an audit of the operations of Guam Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense, and was going to be issuing a audit report sometime in the coming months, and that the audit report was possibly going to make mention of the fact that there was documentation problems and that there were missing documents, but also just all kinds of expenses that they couldn't account for. And so my office decided to do a study, and I want to give kudos to Mr. Burns and DOA. Before we started our audit, Mr. Byrne and the Department of Administration had already completed an internal audit on their own, and they had discovered that there were problems up at both GHS and OCD, and they had completed an audit and had recommended that somebody address them, because at that point, $8.5 million was owed to the general fund by grants that had been paid for by the general fund.
What periods did your investigation cover? From the fiscal years, from what fiscal year to what fiscal year did your investigation cover?
The title says 17 to 23, but actually, in doing the background work on it, I have kudos to my staff. They went back and found out that as early as 2010, that there were issues with Homeland Security, and that they were not turning in reports, and that the problem was so egregious even back in 2010 that the transition committee of 2011, when Governor Calvo came in, their transition report had a report about the fact that there were problems up at Guam Homeland Security and Office of Civil Defense, and had made recommendations for changes and for some permanence in the operation of both those agencies, because they were seeing that there was a problem. That was a transition committee in 2011, and I don't know how they found it, but they had gone through the archives of the legislature to find the transition report that's sent to the speaker at the time. And then they found subsequent audit reports from US FEMA complaining about non-filing of federal reports, financial reports that should be wrote. I mean, regardless, just file something. They weren't being filed on a regular basis. And then again, when there was a transition committee in 2019, the incoming administration was made aware that there had been issues with that department since 10 years before, and they were also advised, you need to put somebody in here in charge who understands, and so it's been a lingering and festering problem, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Mr. Byrne, OPA had mentioned that you yourself said that you had performed an internal audit on the expenditures?
Yes, sir.
What year did you do that, and for what years did it cover?
It was done in, where are we now, 2024? In 2022.
Okay.
I don't actually recall the years that it covered, but I think it was like 2 years before that, so that would be 2020.
And what was the reason as to why you had conducted that internal audit? What led you to want to do that?
We could see, as Mr. Carlson explained, these grants are reimbursement grants, which is the case with most federal grants. And we could see that reimbursement was being held up more than usually. Because not every grant recovery goes smoothly, but in this case we could see that it was not improving.
What were, in your understanding of the grants, were there timelines that were being put on the grants? Let's take, for example, a grant that we received in 2020. What is the timeline that you would normally see in grants that that money needs to be encumbered or expended?
Our system basically is set up to recover expenditure weekly. So in this case, obviously, we could see that wasn't happening weekly. As I just said, there are some grants that are more difficult to recover than others because they have specialized requirements and they aren't always recovered as quickly. Like Medicaid, for instance, because it's an established and rolling program, we do recover in about 3 days. But in this case, the lag was getting longer and longer.
Okay. Mr. Esteves or Ms. Aguigui, let's start with the HS Homeland Security Grant Program. What is your time frame? If you receive a grant in one let's say fiscal year 2022, how much time do you have to be able to expend that grant?
Speaker, thank you for that question. Sir, it would depend. A typical grant would take 3 years, the period of performance. If we're not able to expend the amount that was granted, then we can ask for an extension to that period, but we're only allowed 2 extensions for that period. So depending on what the grant is and what it's for, it would normally take about 3 years or 5 years. Okay. It may be different for emergency management and other grants, but with Homeland Security grants, typically 3 years.
Okay. Mr. Esteves with the EMPG.
Yeah, for EMPG, just to let you know, before it was 24 months is the period of performance, 2 years. But when we actually get the monies from FEMA, we get it a fiscal year late, so we have 1 year to expend the funds.
Okay.
They've recently made that change to a 3-year period of performance, but we only have 2 years to spend the monies. Our periods of performance for fiscal years for HSGP and EMPG are different. So for example, our FY22 EMPG is expired, but on the HSGP FY22, it expires this September.
Okay. Can you intermix EMPG and HSGP funding?
No, yeah, there's
No,
no mixing,
No mixing and
supplanting.
funding?
But we can do a cost share of employees. So an employee can work half on one grant and half on another. But it gets very messy. It's very messy on how they identify their division of labor on timesheets.
Okay.
And so we've since corrected that problem. At the beginning of the fiscal year, we have a new timesheet form, and the employees, in order for us to actually supervisor approval and certify, they have to upload this additional form into JIFMIS. And once it's loaded into that, the module, the actual pay module, the EHRP module, once we've reviewed what we call a Form 120 in our agency, then we're able to actually sign off as supervisor and sign off as, or certify as well. We can provide a copy of the timesheet to show you how employees now track time, but this was a major finding from the Premier Group audit, and something that we actually front-loaded to correct. Because if we continue to go down the path of employees putting very generalized statements on the work that they're doing, and they are doing the work, right? But we just need to give them a vehicle to better articulate that.
Okay. Being what you just said now. General Aggie?
Speaker, if I could add.
Yes?
So there is a possibility that an employee could get paid from both grants. You know, the grants have restrictions on it, and we can't exceed a certain percentage to pay for salary. There's a certain percentage of the grants that can pay for operation and maintenance costs. So for example, we have an employee who could do 50% of the work that they do might be covered by a Homeland Security grant, and then 30% might be covered by an emergency management grant. And it's depending on what the investment justification is. So like Mr. Esteves said, it can get very messy, but it requires, you know, acumen for someone, a grants manager who has the ability to track, you know, these very, these complex maneuvers. And that was the finding, sir, in both the audits, and this is what we're trying to correct.
Okay. If I was to pull your timesheet right now, what funding source is your salary coming from?
The majority of my funding source will come from the Homeland Security Grant Program, and then a small portion of it will come from the Cybersecurity Grant Program.
How about yours, Mr. Esteves?
Yeah, so now I am 100% of the Emergency Management Performance Grant Program, and depending on any work I do on the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, I will charge to that account. It wasn't always the case. Several months ago, the Chief of Staff gave us a clear memo basically bifurcating the offices and ensuring that the Homeland Security grants under DHS headquarters is managed solely under the Office of Homeland Security, and then the FEMA Region 9 actual emergency management grants are run under the Office of Civil Defense.
Okay, so up until about a few months ago when there was the direction to go ahead and bifurcate it in the way it is, during, let's take the time period that you had talked about, 2020. In 2020, who was the boss? Homeland Security Advisor or the Office of Civil Defense Administrator? Who's the boss?
Based on the memo I got from the Office of the Governor, was the Homeland Security Advisor.
When was that memo?
That memo was published in 2018.
2018, okay. Were there some actions that the Homeland Security Advisor was taking that you thought that it was beyond the Homeland Security Advisor's role to be able to do that?
Well, now stemming back from an executive order, this is 2003-13, the first that established the Office of Homeland Security. there's a very direct charge for myself and my office to support the Office of Homeland Security in all their functions.
Okay.
So I can say that, throughout the years, it's always been our goal to work together and to support each other's offices, especially considering that DHS and FEMA, they run their grants, at least on the HSGP side, and EMPG side, they run it very differently. On the Homeland Security grant program side, they have 1 to 2 people that they send out to monitor the grant, but on the EMPG side, they have probably like a staff of like 5 to 7. Sometimes you have FEMA Region 9 supporting the Homeland Security grant program, and the actual program managers out in Washington. So they'll come out and maybe they'll assist in financial monitoring. But on the programmatic side, it's very different missions, right? You're talking about protection mission sets and prevention mission sets versus actual response, recovery, and mitigation. So sometimes it was very difficult for us to work with our grantors because the requirements are different for both grants. And at the time, I was supporting both grants. I was paid, at one time I was paid 50-50, then 75-25, and then now it's just 100% focused on emergency management. And so it's been an evolution, sir.
It's been, and in fact, it has been an evolution. I appreciate your presentation, General. I hear when you said that, it's so dynamic and the tactics need to adapt to some of the changes. However, Mr. Esteves' presentation, there wasn't a review of the emergency management response plan as much as your program since 2015. The indications here was that while your presentation basically wanted to justify, for lack of a better term, some of the problems that existed because of what happened in 2020, the fact of the matter is, this is information that has been perennial, way back as far as 2010 maybe. You have been in power, for lack of a better term, from right around 2019, 2020. Way before the pandemic, way before Marwar. Yet you had an emergency response plan that has not been adapted to that. Your mention earlier, Ms. Aggie, was that because of your military experience, you had to be able to do that. When was the last time you guys worked on your emergency management response plan from either the EMPG, the HSGP, or your cybersecurity level?
Speaker, if I may add, in 2020, I was still serving as the Adjutant General of the Guam National Guard.
Okay.
And I came on board and assumed this position in June of 23.
Mr. Esteves?
So I was on military duty from October 2020 to came back on assignment of June or end of May of 2023.
Do any one of you take responsibility for what has happened?
I take responsibility.
Okay.
Speaker, I take full responsibility. I'm here now, sir.
Okay.
I'm here. I am a
I just
problem
want to make
solver.
sure that that's clear because,
Yes, sir.
okay?
Yes.
When you take on the role, one of the very first things you want to do is making sure your ducks in a row because, as you said, emergency management, you don't know what's going to happen and when.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I think this was a very, like you said, while you view this audits as ways to be able to take care of stuff, the concern was that these audits pointed out to many issues that were perennial that continued to occur and nothing was happening. And as a result of that, we've come up now with budget, with monies where it was shortfall, we're not getting paid, unallowable costs, questionable costs, and whatnot. Okay? That's where we're at with this right now. I appreciate the whole presentation with regards to what happens in the disaster, but this is a disaster in itself. Okay? And so, while we're sticking, and I'm just going to stick primarily to part one. Okay? Can any of you, either one of you, explain to me what happened? First, let's talk about the FEMA report. What were the findings in your FEMA report? And then I'll talk about what were the findings in the OPA report. So what did FEMA find in their audit based on that Premier Group audit?
Thank you for the question, Speaker. Sir, if I could just summarize it into probably two phases. There were lack of control, internal control measures, and lack of documentation, which pretty much what FEMA had found.
Okay, can you expound that a little bit more?
So some of the internal control measures, I already mentioned timesheets as one of them. Employees were unable to articulate the work that they've done on specific projects. And as I stated, that this is something that's already closed out, development of a new timesheet that's been used since last quarter, that's uploaded into GIFMIS, that we've sent to FEMA, and we've also sent a copy of the OPA as part of our corrective action plan. Lack of documentation. What we found is that we've had high employee turnover over the years, and a lot of employees were keeping documents on the desktop. We've since corrected that with two measures. One is a network share drive. We actually have two network share drives. One network share drive is a duplicate of the other network share drive. So we can't say that something was accidentally deleted. We can't say that something was not uploaded or we lost the entire drive. Second is Google Docs. So we have an organizational Google Doc and Google Share Drive, which we upload documents as well. And so it's about the redundancy of how we maintain documents. I can tell you that this is a major shortfall. It's very frustrating when you have an employee that leaves one day and you're trying to recover everything that was in that employee's desktop. And depending on how they left, sometimes you have employees that delete everything off their desktop. But fortunately, because of the redundancies in place of record keeping, either both at BBMR or DOA, we've had to do a lot of document recovery. I'll give an example on the FY20 EMPG closeout that we're doing right now and drawdown. On the actual drawdown request that we're submitting, we have accounted for every single transaction and the corresponding doc. And I could tell you how painstaking that was. On the actual audit findings, to have a grant manager, we're not going to see a grant manager anytime soon. The grant managers right now are the Homeland Security Advisor for her grants and the grants for myself that I manage. Talking about planners, we have one person in the planning section. So the question was, when was the last time we updated or worked on the Guam Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan? For me, it was yesterday. And the revision you're going to see is changing it from the Guam Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan to the Guam Emergency Operations Plan. It's in line with FEMA contingency planning guidance. The newest version, it's in line and nested with the latest National Response Framework. But it's one thing to develop a plan, and right now it's just myself and one employee working on this. But the other part, and we had this in a previous oversight, is maintaining the plan, right? So if we don't have that continuity, plans are going to fall, SOPs are going to fall, right? They're going to be loaded on some file, loaded on the website. And so part of our corrective action is continuity. This is something that FEMA stresses heavily on, is what do we have for continuity? So much that as a revision for FY23 Emergency Management Performance Grant Work Plan, that they wanted to see quarterly continuity training in there, which we agree, it's great. We need it. So the feedback we have from FEMA, the feedback we have from OPA, and the feedback we have from this body, we're going to get to where we need to get to. I'm very confident of that.
Who's your grants manager right now?
As I stated, we don't have a grants manager.
Who's managing your grants right now?
We are managing our grants.
So
Speaker.
who specifically has access to it?
We specifically have access. We upload the reports, we apply for the grants, we do all the inputting.
Is there anybody outside of your organization, Homeland Security, Guam Homeland Security, Office of Defense specifically, that has got access to your grant program?
Speaker, I am not aware of anyone who has access outside of our agency has access to our grants. Speaker, if I may add to answer your question.
Remind you that you're under oath.
As to how, when's the last time we looked at our emergency management plan? Sir, we have added cybersecurity, or island-wide cybersecurity plan to that emergency management plan, and very soon we will be adding a ballistic missile attack plan to our comprehensive emergency management plan.
Great, okay. But, Charles, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so in order to gain access to these systems, it's two-factor authentication. When an employee leaves the agency, we discontinue their email, right? So they no longer have access to their email. So even if they had rights or privileges or roles in the grant given to them by FEMA, because sometimes it's an individual application to FEMA, they wouldn't be able to access those systems anyways, because they won't have the ability through email to do two-factor authentication. And this is true for the ND grants, which is our legacy grants, and now the new FEMA Go. And then controlling access in these systems is the role of the authorizing official. And so the Homeland Security Advisor, he is the authorizing official for her grants, and I'm the authorizing official for my grants, and we have the user access database that we can show on who actually has access to our specific grants and what programs.
My time's about up right now for part one, okay? I appreciate the answers and questions that you provided. Just going to remind you, okay, a little hint. I normally don't ask a question I already know the answer to. And I'm going to remind you, you're under oath. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Tina Muñoz-Barnes, you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I truly appreciate the panel members being here this afternoon. And yes, I do have several questions. I'll try to encompass it into one. But first, I really want to thank the Office of the Public Auditor for his thorough report. And more importantly, I want to thank the Office of Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense for literally looking at the corrective action plan and making sure that we facilitate and follow through. I think one of the first questions as you guys were doing your presentation was, did the Office of Homeland Security, based on the follow-up and based on the corrective action plan, give the update to the OPA so that he can attach it before this hearing? That was number one. But in all respect to the process moving forward and the issues that have been happening for over a decade, 2010 is what I heard. I'm looking at at what is being submitted today, and you can tell is really, really thick. And I just want to say I appreciate that, because for me, today is more about listening and trying to follow through on what FEMA and what the federal government was saying is how do we recover this 8.4? Are we going to get it or not? Is it lost? But how do we move forward? And in that effort, Mr. Chair, I really just want to ask Homeland Security and Civil Defense is, in my readings, fast readings of this audit, there seems to be challenges with some of the staffing, right? And so for my question was, what is your current staffing levels? How many people do you have? And what is the total amount for your staff? And what are you doing to continuously train your employees? And how's your turnover rate? And I say that like that to encompass all those questions is because I know that your agency is very critical, and that staffing level is very key. And, you know, how do we move forward to right-size the agency with the staff and the training necessary to move forward, especially since now that we have, I mean, I hope it's the updated corrective action plan, and I'm hoping that we can get what you presented this afternoon, General, so that we can follow through, and maybe when we come back here again for the updated oversight, that there are things that are happening and that the federal government is also, right, FEMA and all the other agencies that are required to go over with you and the funding that you get, that we can be able to say that we are on track now, especially because it's 2025 and this problem has been happening since 2010. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So I open that up to Civil Defense, Homeland Security, and maybe looking at the numbers there, and I truly appreciate the speaker's line of questioning also, because as we are in this room, I'm not here to fight you, I'm here to want to work with you and see that there have been problems. There's, every 4 years, there may be a change in administration, there may be a change in employees, but what is it going to take to make that agency continue to move no matter what, no matter who's in charge? Thank you, Mr. Chair. So hoping you can answer some of those inquiries.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Barnes. Ma'am, I'm going to cede that question over to Mr. Esteves. He's in a better position to answer your questions regarding staffing.
Yeah, and so on the actual emergency management side, and we have 6, including myself, 7 classified employees. And so I can say that we are 1 deep in all sections. And when I say sections, these are sections of both our blue sky operations and then also how we operate in an incident command or incident command-like structure. And so we have 1 person that's in the finance and admin section. We have 1 person that's in that manages the operations section, and under him, he has 1 civil defense coordinator on the classified side, and also 1 civil defense coordinator on the unclassified side. But the title is project officer, but they're doing the duties and responsibilities of a civil defense coordinator. We have 1 person in the planning section, a classified program coordinator, 1 person in the logistics, who's an auxiliary worker, and we have Jenna, who's our public information officer. So we are 1 deep across. That is the total staffing for the Emergency Management Performance Grant Program. We are short civil defense officers, classified civil defense officers, and civil defense coordinators. On the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, we have 1. And then on the Homeland Security Grant Program, which some of the staff they do share duties and responsibilities. For example, on the training exercises, there is a 50% commitment on the Homeland Security to run their training exercises. The same thing on the public information side. So when I'm talking about all the staff that is here under this office, it's the same set of staff that's supporting the Homeland side. The only additional body is Ms. Lucia Perez, who's also under the state local cyber grant program.
If I may echo that also, Senator, we also have 1 deep for our nonprofit security grant program. And so sometimes we have 1 person running 2 programs at the same time. So for example, Ms. Lucy, she works both the Homeland Security and cybersecurity grant programs. So we are, and then Mr. Esteves and I, aside from all the other duties we have, we also have to manage the grants that we are assigned to. So we're very shallow, ma'am. We have not had a plus up in personnel, but we're doing the best that we can.
Now we do have employees, but these grants sunset. So for example, we have Mr. Joe Cabana, who cannot be here due to personal family emergency, runs the Guam Recovery Office. Before, the Guam Recovery Office and the public assistance grants were under our offices. But now we've since separated that out, and so they're their own operation. And in the Premier Group Audit, if you want to talk about where the big amounts of monies referenced there are coming from, it's really the public assistance grant. And a lot of these grants have 5-year period of performances. Sometimes they do get extended, understanding that sometimes projects take a little longer than needed. But if you want to talk about the operational budget that I get from FEMA and the Homeland Security advisor gets from DHS, on the Homeland Security side, I would say in a good fiscal year, about $1 million. And then on the FEMA side, to run the entire emergency management enterprise for Guam, I think this past FY we got about 800 and I think it was 880 or 850K to run it over, projects and programs over 2 fiscal years.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just based on the answers that the panel has shared with me, I think it's important that as we realize that they're shallow, and we don't want to see a repeat and a continuing effect of maybe not being able to get reimbursements, because I know that for every situation that comes up to hand, it's the government, the local government that pays first, and then the FEMA reimbursements come in later. And I don't ever want to hear that we're going to lose out of millions of dollars. So we have to look at personnel. We have to look at the corrective action plans that will stabilize this agency working civil defense and Homeland. I think it's important to realize if you're really that shallow and you need that support, then you've got to ask for it. And if there's any other grant that's out there that we can look to support the agencies, then I think that needs to be requested. But Mr. Chair, I like I said earlier, the criticalness of this agency is key to safeguarding us, especially when we go through the disasters. And I think that it's important that if staffing is the problem, then they should be able to delineate it further and get that, because if you said the turnover was high, or the report said the turnover of employees were high, how do you stabilize that, and how do you keep them from not leaving? And what training can we do to support that? And this is what this body is here for. And we create the policy, and if there is a need to support additional manpower or ascertaining additional grants, then we've got to look at it together. Because I don't ever want to see this again, and losing federal money, it just aches me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Sabrina Salas-Matanani, you have questions?
Yeah, and I'll keep it short. I don't have a whole lot. Thank you for coming. But for me, no one is questioning your dedication. It's more so for me the lack of documentation throughout the years, not just this administration, but previous administrations. So I just want to cut to the chase, because people that are watching at home, just layman's people, I think really what they want to know is how much are we going to have to reimburse, or how much are we going to lose in federal grant money?
So we are actively working to close out grants and seeking reimbursement. I'm preparing to present to FEMA Region 9 for the emergency management. This is the FY20 Emergency Management Performance Grant Program, close to $980,000 worth of, and this is just one grant year. The Homeland Security Advisor did the same thing on HSGP 20? Yeah, 20. So it's really up to both DHS and FEMA, based on the documents we've provided, to tell us if it's acceptable, what questions they have. But we're not tracking FEMA seeking recoupment of any funds at this time, or loss of funds.
And I can confirm that.
Okay. Ma'am, if I may. So the blessing in all this is that FEMA is willing to work with us. They realize the gravity of the situation we're in. And so along with working with us, they give us some options on how we can further resolve the issue at hand. And so, for example, Mr. Sabas was saying that there's an opportunity to somehow make up for the funds that FEMA is identifying as not reimbursable. And so they give us options. For example, he runs the emergency management grants. I run the Homeland Security grants. So in fiscal year 20, for a Homeland Security grant for fiscal year 20, we have an option to figure out how we can recover those funds that we didn't expend through use of a future grant that we can apply for. So, you know, we're working with what we have, but FEMA is also being innovative to figure out how can we help Guam. And I will tell you that we have a true friend with FEMA. You know, we talk with them regularly, on a regular basis. They understand our unique situation just because of the distance, the tyranny of distance and time that we have to deal with. You know, for example, my grants manager is based in Washington, D.C., and whenever we have to talk with him, you know, I've got Miss Lucy calling him at, you know, the wee hours of the morning here, which is evening for him there, and they're very accommodating. So I hope we've answered your question. I don't think, you know, I really feel confident that there's probably not going to be a request from FEMA.
Speaker PJ Cruz.
I really do think that one of the points should be made. Time is of the essence. As Mr. Byrne mentioned, some of these grants are ready to expire. And unless and until we provide the documents asked for those years, when the grant closes, you're not going to be able to go back in and reopen it to ask for reimbursement. That's why in our audit, we said time is running on a lot of these old ones, 19 and 20, and until you get the documents in, maybe we'll get 6 million back, but there'll be 2 million that won't be. We don't know, because until the time period closes, and we don't know how much has been provided and how much will be reimbursed. But time is of the essence.
How worried are you, Esther or Charles, that FEMA in the future may be less inclined to give us funding?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, this is based off of our meetings with FEMA. Their sole purpose, at least in the Grants Management Division, is to give us as much money as possible. If they don't give us these grants, I mean, it kind of defeats their purpose to exist. And so they are in every position to help us as best possible. There is not a week that goes by where we don't meet with some member of FEMA, whether that's on the mitigation side, that's on the emergency management, the FEMA Region 9 Grants Management Division side, the DHS HQ grants side. So I am very confident that they're going to continue to give us grant dollars. Right now, what we want to move away from is restrictive holds, or what they call restrictive cash hold. Now, restrictive cash hold is what we've had on the past couple grants, and that is where we can't draw down at will without providing documentation. So we want to get out of that status. We want to restore the confidence that we can draw down because FEMA is confident that we have processes in place for proper document management.
Senator, continuity would be the key word here. There's reason to worry, of course, because you know of the situation we're in. But I too am confident that as long as we work with our counterparts with FEMA, as long as they see that we're making a concerted effort to work with them and to ensure that we don't go back to this state of crisis, I too am confident that we could work with FEMA and they would work with us. We may not get as much as we used to, but I think we will be able to request. And there's always opportunities for funding it's called notice of funding opportunities for different grants, and depending on what our investment justification is, we stand to be granted. We were just awarded another cybersecurity grant of $800,000 to use to replace electronics, and so that was just recently. And so I think continuity will be key here. If we have people in place that can continue the work that we've already done and to ensure that the process is followed, the correct process is followed, and we have processes in place, I think that we would be moving in the right direction. Thank you, ma'am.
And apologize, just to add some background on the grants that sustain operations. The two big grants is HSGP and EMPG. Now, these are non-competitive grants. The amount that Guam gets is based off of the total appropriation for the grant by Congress. And I forget which one is which, but Guam gets 0.08% of the total appropriation, and I want to say this is for EMPG, and 0.025% of the total appropriation that may be for HSGP, or vice versa. And so it's a non-competitive grant, but these are the two grants that sustain our operations. Every year when we submit to BBMR the grants inventory, we always submit what austerity measures look like. But if the trend continues for EMPG, you're going to see a decrease, potentially, we saw almost a 100K decrease. And this is not something that we can affect. As I stated, this is a percentage of the total appropriation for this grant program.
Thank you. You have any other questions? All right, thank you, Senator. Senator Vince Borja, you have any questions for the panel?
No, I don't have any questions, not at this time. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for the presentation. Or actually, I just have one question. Actually, you know, as we, you know, you guys have explained a lot of the work that has been done to ensure that processes are in place. I think one of the things that, and maybe it's in the submission of your updated processes, but you know, when during operations, is there anything in place? I mean, whether it be then or even now, with what you have, as to when you know, like, you know, because for me, when I think of operations and you understand what your budget is annually or quarterly, whatever it may be, at what point is there like a stop on, okay, you know, based on funding or based on the resources available, how do we know when to be, okay, we need to like raise a flag because we're going to go over time or we're going to go over money? You know, how is that handled so that in the future, should an emergency arise or a typhoon come and we come together, there's something in place where we know, hey, like we are going to need to get, you know, overtime approval. You know, you also mentioned you only have a small staff. Is there at least a good understanding today of what you need, how much money you need to run operations?
Senator, thank you for that question. Yes, we do. We've never had to prepare a budget before, and now we are. And so we have taken our grants and we have used the calculations to it, and we project what we're going to need for salary, what are we going to need for certain projects, what's the anticipated. We apply a 3% increase on that to account for any raises or any additional expenses that we may have. And then if we don't expend certain funds that have been allocated for its purpose, we always refer back to our grantor and we ask permission to repurpose. Can we use this for this certain project if it hasn't been used for this particular investment? And as long as our grantor is kept in the loop, as long as we have documentation that the grantor has seen and has approved that, we share that with BBMR, and so that there's a paper trail that follows that. And we learned that from the audit, but we're getting better at making sure that we track every single thing. Another process that we started is to, rather than wait till the whole fiscal year is complete, we now provide our grantor quarterly reports, just showing what we've spent, what we intend to spend it on, and that way, at the end of the year, our grantor is not overwhelmed with a year's work of documentation projects that they would need to have time to spend on, and we make it manageable. And so that was just, just by accident, we figured out that process might work. And so far, we've been doing, implementing that, and it's been working, at least for the Homeland Security side.
All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Therese Slahi, you have questions for the panel?
Yes, thank you for all of your answers and I guess plans going forward. First of all, some of my questions are very basic. Is it intended going forward that the Office of Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense are going to be 100% federally funded?
Yeah, Senator, currently right now, we are 100% federally funded. I can't speak to the future of the agency, but we are going to continue to apply for grants to sustain our operations. And remember, these are non-disaster grants. As Senator Borja mentioned, very different when we have disasters and we have to request for either a special or supplemental appropriation to keep the operations going. But as of right now, we're going to continue to seek out grant opportunities.
All right, so we plan to live within those means, within the grants that we are receiving.
Yes, ma'am.
All
But
right, so,
Senator,
thank you.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but if your question is a segue to us to see if we could maybe turn to you and ask if you can identify some funding for at least our operational costs, then, that's definitely something that, we can take a look at.
Well, I'm hoping that we won't have to do that personally. I'm hoping if these are programs that are funded in other states through federal grants, that we should absolutely avail of federal grants to fund these programs. So the question is now, perhaps the public auditor, if you wouldn't mind, I know you said we've all read the reports, but I don't think the public necessarily read these reports, but, and for me, if you could just again, give us a breakdown. So on report number 1, or the audit number 1, part 1 rather, there was a total of $8.4 million owed to the general fund. That was what the final conclusion was. And some of this was findings from DOA first, and then you. Is this recoverable anymore?
I really can't say what years those included. So if the grant is still alive, is still open, then some of it can be recovered if the two agencies and DOA and BBMR provide them documentation that is requested.
All right, but
if it's closed, then it's lost.
Okay, so and in your report, you reported that some are closed.
Yeah.
Or were closing, for example. So I don't know who can confirm. It talked about 71.3 paid by the general fund, only 62.9 reimbursed by FEMA in one table, and then they talked about 7.8 million have yet to be reimbursed by FEMA. And then they talk about 7.4 and 6.3 million were for grants that expired between August 2019 and September 2023. So for those expired, I'm on page 12, those that expired between August 2019 and September 23, is that what we're supposed to conclude, that those are not recoverable anymore?
Senator, the public auditor is correct. The grants are closed, but that's for the period of performance. What FEMA has granted us is extensions to the closeout period, liquidation period.
Which periods? Which ones?
The closeout liquidation period.
For which years?
All the years.
All of them?
Yes.
From
Yeah. But we're working backwards. So, for example, FY20, which actually expires, the actual total appropriation expires 9/30/2025. That is the drop date that FEMA can provide us any sort of reimbursement of funds. And the same thing for FY21, it will be the preceding FY, so forth and so on, because it's the max of the 5-year appropriation for the grant. Now, the period of performance is simply the period in which we can expend funds. Anything outside of that is deemed ineligible unless we have what we call a POP extension, period of performance extension. But working with FEMA, their whole goal is to guide us through the process to recover the maximum amount available.
So for the grant periods 2020 and go forward, we have a chance to recover.
Yes.
You are working on those right now.
Yes.
But what about for those periods that were reported in the audit from 2019? I guess.
So 2019, we've submitted grant documentation, working on the drawdown of funds. Now, that one was a little tricky because when we got the final, or when we got determinations from FEMA, it actually exceeded the 5-year appropriation. And so we're assessing options on how to draw that down, because the system doesn't allow us to do the drawdown because it's already exceeded 5 years. So the grants are recoverable. FEMA is working with us throughout the process, and I can say that the staff is doing a great job on document recovery and assembly to the grantors.
All right, well, this audit also says that the 2021 and 2022, well, 2021 HSGP and 2022 EMPG expiring in August 24 and September 24. So maybe if I can ask DOA, are you still tracking, what is still not reimbursed to the general fund? Is it still 8.4? Can you update this audit, in other words, or the findings in this audit?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Most of it, as I think I answered the question earlier, most of it is still outstanding because, as Mr. Estevez said, the funds are frozen. It's not that the grant is, the grant is not existent anymore, it's just the funds are frozen. You can, if you go onto the federal drawdown website, the funds are there, it's just that we can't access them until they're released.
So as of today, what's your total?
Just an estimate, I think we probably recovered about 400,000.
That's all?
Yeah.
Not 8.4 million?
Not 8.4 million.
Okay,
No.
that's much better. Then what about, so it hasn't gone up since this audit?
No, it hasn't gone up because the new costs are under new grants that aren't frozen.
Okay. All right. And are you confident that the, what you think those grants, the requirements of the grants are being met as was told to us by these representatives?
For the new grants?
For the new
yes,
grants?
Much more
yes,
confident.
absolutely.
Yes.
You both are on that. Everybody's on that for the new grants?
Yes.
All right. And so you're saying we've been reimbursed for the 8.4, the bulk of it?
No. We've recovered like 400,000.
Oh,
of
you
the
mean
8.4.
we've only recovered 400,000? I thought you were
Yes.
saying the balance. Okay, then that's a very different story. Okay, so, all right, of the 8.4, do you have any hope that we will recover any of it?
I've not heard anybody say that, certainly from FEMA, that they're not going to attempt, and I think Mr. Estevez referred to this earlier, is they're trying to help us to recover the amount. They're not really interested in not recovering, or not allowing us to recover the amount. But I can't answer that fully because we haven't got to the end of the audit period, which is March.
Okay, all right, thank you. And do either of you at DOA or BBMR intend to subsidize Office of Homeland Security or Office of Civil Defense with general fund monies in the upcoming years?
Just by the nature of their operations, the grant structure, as I mentioned earlier, we front the general fund money, then we get the reimbursement. So I've been on a number, almost every corrective action plan call. I even asked at one point in time, can we get a report card of where we are after we've gone down like maybe a third of the agenda after about 4 or 5 calls? What your feeling is, so I can have a better understanding of whether or not we're going to resolve this with the corrective action plan and the submission of documentation, or are you going to lean towards potential reimbursement? They did not want to provide any comments on what it is that they were thinking, but my takeaway was that, as Mr. Burns said, they're not interested in being, and penalizing us and recovering stuff. They just want us to get the paperwork together. So again, what my office did, when you look at the premier audit and the section regarding question costs on travel, we pulled out everything and we sent it to them. So you know, it's like, okay, you don't have to worry about two things here. One is SOPs regarding travel, because they're robust and sound. And number two, here's the documentation for the quote-unquote question cost. So that's off the table. It's just the bigger issues require more, you know, manpower to dig into and find the documents, provide them to FEMA. And, you know, that's going to take more effort than we're currently exerting right now, because as the public auditor said, time is running out. So we really need to concentrate on addressing the documentation to support the question costs in eligibility by, no, this is what we did, here's the...
All right, thank you. Is there any finding of non-compliance from like deliberate not paying attention to the rules, or were they mostly just for not submitting documents that were required, so they might, I mean, you know what I mean? Or were they like, did they act in disregard of the rules? For example, pay overtime when that was specifically against the rules for overtime?
I'm afraid that on some of it, yes. And I think that's, I want to make this a statement, not just of this agency, but you'll be seeing it, if you've read our recent audit reports, performance audits, you'll find this to be true of most Guam agencies. The problem is, when our auditors go in to initially look at an agency, they ask, what are your standard operating procedures and your rules and regulations for operations? And then they look to see whether or not you're complying with it. And when you're not complying with it, we immediately find that there's a risk when you're not complying with it. And so you're going to find that in most Guam agencies, I mean, in some Guam agencies, they haven't even done their rules and regulations. We've shown that up at Revenue and Taxation, where they've not done the rules and regs for certain things up there. And then once it's established, I mean, once it's adopted, complying with it. The problem that we're finding is that they're not. And I think Mr. Esteves in his presentation mentioned it, actually admitted it. They have a standard operating procedure that was established in 2015. He, as he put it, was written by some master's degree person, and nobody can understand it, so they're ignoring it. Until, it has to be understood by all these agencies and the employees, until and unless somebody revokes those rules and regulations, or establishes new SOPs, you have to comply with the 2015, regardless of whether or not you can read it or not. And it's great that you're writing new SOPs, but until your SOP is adopted, you can't be operating the way that you want to under the SOP. And you'll find that to be coming out in a bunch of performance audits we're going to be releasing in the next month. It's just an issue of complying with the rules and regulations you're supposed to be operating under.
So we will continue to be at risk if we don't comply with your 2015 or they're not updated. How soon will those be updated?
So we've already updated, have a draft form, at least 3 different SOPs across the 13 findings. We present this during our biweekly CAT meeting. The last major input or submission we did, following all the recommendations from FEMA, was December last year. So that's still under FEMA review. We're actually supposed to have a CAT meeting yesterday, but FEMA is still looking at the documents we sent them. So one of it was the creation of a RACI matrix, Gantt charts, flow diagrams and charts. And every time we do these submissions, we also CC the OPA staff as well. And if this body would like, we can CC members as well on everything we submit to FEMA.
Thank you. Final question is, the chairperson raised earlier that if this 8.4 is not reimbursed, the 8.4 million, it comes out of the general fund, yes, but does it impact any agency, was his question, and your answer was, well, it comes out of the general fund. Well, normally, all of the general fund revenues allocated to different agencies or expenses, so I don't know, can you just please expound on that further? Where have you taken it out of, which agencies were not able to use 8.4 million?
Because this relates to a prior year, the shortfall was in the prior year and doesn't affect the current year.
It didn't affect in prior years.
Yes.
So would we be able to see that somewhere, like the 8.4 came out of these different places in the prior years?
Well, it reduced. I mean, in each of the last few years, we've had a surplus. The surplus would have been higher, and the 8.4, as the public order
covered
said,
by surplus.
Doesn't relate to any one year. It's accumulation
Yes,
years.
that's right.
But within the surplus, it would have been netted off.
All right. Is that shown anywhere, Mr. Auditor, in the overall financial audits when that happens? Where would we find that? That 8.4 million of costs that were not reimbursed and not really appropriated either, but they came out of excess revenue.
My understanding, and I'll stand to be corrected by Mr. Byrne, but I think there is a line item that's receivable from the federal government.
There is, but if you look, and it's kind of part way through the audit, there's an analysis that shows the general fund and the federal fund, and it'll show as a transfer from the general fund to the federal fund.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Shelley Calvo, you have any questions for the panel?
Buenas and half a day, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Half a day to all my colleagues. Not so much a question, but I'd like to thank Homeland Security, Office of Homeland Security and Office of Civil Defense for a really comprehensive testimony and operations. Okay. For agencies that are pretty much have their thing going on straight, you guys are good with your operations, achievements, coordination with agencies and everything. My only concern is when I go through all these, the reports that was submitted, there are a lot of missing documents over the years. What I wanted to see moving forward is if we could probably ensure that we keep all things, documents that are imperative to be kept, such as timesheets. It would be good to have an account of all that, and that way we could avoid sessions like this, right? Moving forward, that's all I'm interested to do, and obviously to make sure that all the recommendations from OPA is met. That's all, so we can avoid things like this. And thank you again. Thank you for everyone that's here. That's all.
Thank you, Senator Shelley. Senator Chris Barnett, do you have questions for the panel?
Sidos Masi, Mr. Chair, Hafaday and Biba Betnes, thank you for your attendance today. And thank you to Mr. Estevez and Administrator Agagi for implementation, addressing a lot of these issues, which didn't just happen yesterday, but have been issues going back as far as 2011. And I commend also the Public Auditor, Cruz, and his staff for your diligent hard work, not just with this audit, but with a lot of previous audits. And I've kind of been one of your biggest fans here in the legislature, and really pushing for these audits and these findings to be acted on by the Attorney General or any other relevant parties that could really hold the people in these audits accountable. Because if you're going to get into the weeds and conduct all these audits and find these findings, and then we don't do anything about holding the wrongdoers accountable, I mean, what's really the point? And so I guess for me, we're 2 hours into this hearing, and we've heard a lot, but nobody's really said the F word, and I mean fraud, which to me was the real smoking gun in this audit, other than the absence of the SOPs. On the first page of the part 2 of the audit, the findings were that overtime was unauthorized, overtime work was not properly authorized by GHS OCD officials, overtime plans were missing and untimely approved, overtime work resulted in grant over expenditures and audit deficiencies, and overtime documentation was requested but not provided by GHS OCD. As a result, the Office of the Public Auditor questioned $2.8 million overtime costs charged to GHS OCD accounts. We also found that GHS OCD did not have SOPs, which we're very familiar with by now, and allowed one employee to have authority, custody, and accounting of federal grant expenditures. Fraud risk is heightened in GHS OCD. And then as we get deeper into this report on pages 8 and 9, one of the findings is that there was a little bit of shenanigans or funny business with some signatures. And this reminded me of the audit on overtime that you conducted of the Guam Department of Education, where we had one individual signing off on 4 different signature blocks. And so I guess my first question is if you're able to go into any detail on some of the signature deficiencies in the audit. And then secondly, if you can state on the record whether or not your office, through this audit and its findings, believed that there was criminal intent that could possibly be prosecuted by the Office of the Attorney General.
Senator, if we can, I just wonder if we could focus on the first one and hold on. I'd ask that Lester do the same. Do you have any questions on the first part?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I do have a prior commitment over a common and carried out at 4:30, so I did want to get these very important questions in. So I'd ask if you would indulge the viewing public and please have these questions answered by preferably Public Auditor Cruz, if that's
sure.
okay.
Okay, then let me go back to Mr. Carlson then on part 2, I guess, if you can. You made a statement earlier. Can you repeat what you said about part 2? I know you have to go back to the past, but if you can bring up your statement on part 2 of the audit.
Yes. Again, prefacing my remarks that from a reactive standpoint, there's no doubt about how much we depend on the services, dedication provided by the people that work at these 2 different agencies, even though they're kind of under one umbrella. But they do need some fiscal stewardship. We did provide overtime plans to the Office of the Public Auditor. Unfortunately, throughout this entire endeavor, these agencies have not given one piece of paper to anybody. So the public auditor had the background information to look at the overtime periods in question and draw his conclusions from the documents. COVID made us more efficient because we quit taking paper documents. We went full electronic. BBMR shut down at the beginning of COVID for 4 hours. It became extremely readily apparent we needed to be working, DOA needed to be working, some government operations, essential services required the 2 of us to be open. So we've always been there. We've never been adversely affected by anything, especially and including COVID. I don't know if, there must have been a reason why there's a page that's included in the Part 2 audit. It's for Manyi, which there's an executive order that went out. We all got to go home because of the potential for a storm. All executive orders, when there's an emergency, have standard language about submitting an overtime plan to BBMR in advance of the overtime being incurred. That is the SOP for disasters that, and quite frankly, operational procedures in general, but when there's like with Manyi, there was an executive order, Typhoon Condition 2 was declared, and right there in the executive order, it's like clockwork. And come on, all of us are watching TV for 3 days before the storm. We all know the storm is coming, right? You know, is it going to go here? Is it going to go there? So for the life of me, I can't understand why somebody didn't just have a draft of the overtime plan on the computer, and then when Typhoon Condition 2 is declared, all of a sudden, boom, okay, print it, sign it, submit it. So the date received is November 15th. Manyi was November 12th. That's when we got it, November 15th. Mr. Esteves and I have had several very, very adult conversations that involved me talking and him intently listening with his head down because of what it was that I was saying. We got to cut this out. And this is November of last year. So, SOPs are great. Corrective action plans are great. Implementation, consistency is what I'm looking for. And I've made no bones about it. Anybody who knows me knows I know how to speak English with a lot of four-letter words. Charles heard every one of them. We have a lot of work to do. We're willing to do the work, but we got to get it done.
Okay, OPA, can you respond to Senator Barnett's question again?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator, for being one of our fans. But in deference to the chair, we never I didn't discuss the second audit because of that. But your question, thank you for the question anyway. It wasn't our intent to either to actually say, we hinted that because of the risks that were taken and the non-compliance, that there was a possibility of fraud. We, I guess, for lack of a better word, punted it to the Attorney General's office to say, you do further investigation, which is scheduled next week. We're meeting with them. And after you've done your investigation, you make the determination of whether or not there is fraud, whether or not there's criminal intent, and whether or not there's sufficient evidence to take action. We have only pointed out the fact that there has been non-compliance, non-adherence to SOPs.
So, Mr. Public Auditor, of course I'm referencing page 8 of 30 that says here that signatures on the signature line did not match the signature specimens of authorizing officials submitted to the Department of Administration, which sounds a lot like forgery to me, but I guess my question is, do you believe the implementation of these corrective actions and these SOPs will eliminate the possibility of this type of fraud happening again?
Thank you, Senator. Not specifically this, but yes, we have provided copies of those documents to both Department of Administration and to to Homeland Security, OCD, so for them to look at it. We are not handwriting experts, but from what we could see, it didn't look like it matched. If they could say that it was, if one of them would claim that it was their signature, then it is, I guess. But from what we looked at, the curves didn't match and the swirls, whatever, just didn't match. But I can't say definitively because none of us are handwriting experts.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. I would think with that being said, it really reminds me of another instance where through the procurement of the quarantine facilities, we had a former director of public health who also questioned how her signature was affixed to documents that she says she didn't sign. So kind of seeing a trend here, but nothing further, Mr. Chair, and again, Sido Smasi for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Barnett. Senator Will Parkinson, do you have any questions on part one of the OPA report number 24? Any questions?
Yes, sir. So just before I get to my questions, though, I just want to talk through what we've learned here today and just make sure I have a clear understanding. So please correct me if I misspeak anything here about any of these. So just to be clear, we're here because of unreimbursed federal expenses to the tune of $8.4 million. But I'm hearing that we have recovered $400,000 of that 8.4. Is that correct?
That's an estimate from memory, Senator.
Okay. And we have this debt because of long-term non-compliance with federal guidelines. We're not doing the paperwork on it. And this federal debt is affecting our long-term fiscal responsibility. Because as you said, you paid these previous unresolved funds from excess revenues, correct? From surpluses.
Surplus is not necessarily excess revenues. However the surplus arose, yes.
Okay. So when we're getting these CRER reports, we're seeing that after after this has already been taken out of the previous years.
Yes, as I endeavored to say, most of these costs were incurred before the current CRERs that you're talking about.
Okay. And, you know, I bring this up because these are lost opportunity costs for us. That $8.4 million, I mean, that's money that could go towards various projects. It goes to things like a power credit. We're short $6 million right now in our CRERs, and something like another $8 million of it could get us one step closer to doing projects like that. And so I want to talk some more about, because I mean, you mentioned that you folks have come in here in 2023, correct? So that was when you had started. So before you had come in, who was responsible for these failures?
Senator, thank you for that question. I don't have an accurate track record of who was the Homeland Security Advisor or the Civil Defense Administrator at the time. I do know that I came in June of 23, just 5 days after Typhoon Mawar, and that's when I assumed the position of Homeland Security Advisor.
Okay, because I'm seeing here in the documentation that we have been having problems for many, many years, long before your tenure, even going back to the previous administration. So while I find it admirable that you'd be willing to accept responsibility for these failures long precede you, to be truth be told. And so when did you learn about these problems yourself, that these documentation problems had been occurring for so long?
Sir, I learned about them during the audits.
Okay. And are you confident that the controls that you have put in place will actually prevent misuse and correct this problem?
Senator, what I am confident is my ability to provide this leadership.
Because I echo the sentiment of BBMR that these corrective action plans and all of these things we want to do are fantastic. But if we don't actually do them, what is the point of having them? And so we talk about the trust. Have you lost FEMA's trust? Are we in danger of losing these monies long term, or are they still willing to work with you? Where are we at in that relationship? Because this is a long-term problem. What's to stop them to just finally say, enough's enough, we're not doing this anymore?
Just from working with FEMA in the last year, Senator, I am confident that FEMA is still willing to work with us. You know, again, their whole purpose is to assist. And so, like Azuda, you provide that help where it's most needed. And in this case, I think FEMA is reciprocating that value we have of Azuda. So I'm very confident that FEMA will continue to work very closely with us because they want to.
Okay, and who is going to be overseeing these training programs to ensure that staff is fully compliant and knows what they're doing?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So that will be a joint effort between me and Mr. Esteves.
Okay. And why hasn't this been prioritized sooner? Is this because you just didn't know until the audit that these problems existed?
Senator, there could be a number of reasons why it wasn't done, but we're focused on going forward, sir, and we have plans in place. We have performance evaluations that we have adopted. In the military, we do regular counseling, so I know that that's at least what I'm going to do as soon as they are receiving money from the Homeland Security grant. My approach is to counsel them, let them know what my expectations are, and then do a quarterly counseling and monitoring and let them know where they stand with my expectations.
Okay, and one more question. What assurances can you provide that Guam Homeland Security will not lose federal funding due to ongoing compliance? Why should the people of Guam trust that this time will be different when we've seen such a long-term problem with this paperwork? I want to give you this opportunity to speak directly to the people of Guam and tell them, why should they trust you when we are not looking to get this done correct?
Senator, that's a great question. I always believe that presence is important. And the fact that we are present today, the fact that we want to own up to the mistakes, if we want to call them that, to work that was done or work that was not done from people before us, that speaks volumes of the commitment we have, the vision we have, the desire we have to make things right. The people of Guam deserve nothing less. And I can tell you that with my military experience, with Mr. Esteves' military experience, with the guidance we have with our counselors beside us, I can say with 100% confidence that the people of Guam should now understand that we are now here, we're present, we're going to take a hard look at this, and we're going to follow procedure and find solutions to the problems that have existed way before we took office.
Okay, I apologize. So I said that was my last question, but I do got a few more if you can give me some grace here. Why were $2.8 million in overtime costs incurred without proper authorization or documentation? And how do we justify these expenditures?
Senator, I'm going to cede that question over to my colleague, Mr. Esteves.
So when we talk about $2.8 million in overtime, a lot of it is the lack of documentation that we're able to provide. So I was able to provide what I had in my records due to staff turnover and just missing files, and also just the short time. I'm not talking about from the OPA's request to us, but just to kind of paint the picture of what we're going through the month that we're doing the audit with OPA is we're doing the concurrent finalization of the Premier Group audit. We also had the monitoring from FEMA, all going on simultaneously. When I was sending out documents, I thought about just sending it to 3 different bodies at once, and I think we were going through an internal audit with DOA. In a period of 2 weeks, we had simultaneous audits asking for different things, and so it's my failure to requests for whatever overtime documents from BBMR. In terms of late submissions, a lot of it, a good majority of it had to do during COVID-19, where much of the staff was operationally focused. We worried about the overtime later. We are doing better. Manyi happened, and we were able to get the overtime plan approved 3 days later. And so it's iterative. It's growing.
How did one employee have unchecked authority over grant approvals, custody, and...
Senator, let me, because I know he still has a presentation, and if you, with all due respect, can we get him to, if he hasn't done that, I'm just trying to get to the, we have only a couple more members. If we can we just let them finish and then allow, because I know that I did do this with Senator Barnett, but could we just hold off? Is that possible?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and because I know he still has one half of a presentation to give us. We're almost there.
No problem.
Is that okay?
No problem.
Yeah, and I'll go back to you. Thank you, Senator.
And with that, I have no further questions.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. All right, let me go to Senator Tello. Do you have any questions on the first part of the OPA report, if you can? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also like to thank you personally for having this oversight, receiving my letter requesting for this oversight. I greatly appreciate it. It was something that we should have done in the 37th Guam legislature, but it didn't happen, so I'm glad it's sooner than later, which is very important. First, I'd like to thank you, everyone, for being here, and like you said, General Agagi, you're right, you're here. You're here today to answer these questions, so we greatly appreciate it. You know, I'm going to try and stay within this OPA report with regards to the HSGP and the EMPG grants that was in question here. And it was said earlier, I just want to verify from Mr. Byrne that the funds have been frozen. So it's still sitting in there. So no money since 2018. No money has been drawn down from that account. It stayed frozen. Or has any money been taken out of that account?
As I responded to an earlier question, there has been some. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's around 400,000.
400,000, and can you tell me how you were able to get that 400,000?
It was just, no, I can't, really. It's something that FEMA did. When you, as I was describing, and you look at the website, there was a small amount that they released. Okay.
And it was mentioned that, you know, trying to get this reimbursed back, there are documents that need to be given to FEMA to try and draw down on these funds. Are all these documents available? I mean, do they exist? Every single one for every penny that you need to get reimbursed from, do you have all the documents or do some of them not exist?
I can tell you that personally doing and working, for example, the FY20 EMPG grant, that we're able to get every document for every penny.
This is for the EMP?
Yeah, so
What
every
Homeland?
transaction, these are complete procurement records to the cent, reconciled, and I'm happy to provide that spreadsheet and documents to show you that yes, we were able to recover.
So then why hasn't it been given to FEMA so that you can get the money, the funds?
So it's just proper review, right? So the way I received the documents is I received a transaction list, but I can't just simply provide this to FEMA. So what I've done is every reference to it in the work plan, I'm attaching the actual transaction and then the reference document. Lessons learned in the past is that it really delays the drawdown process when we just give them the list of transactions and have them try to decipher the AS400 printout themselves without no context of what the vendor numbers are, what the different accounting codes mean. And so the staff, they're able to provide me the raw documentation.
Well, Charles, this audit was done just for the listening audience as well, that this audit was done since it came out, since 2023, is that correct, Public Auditor? So since the time this audit came out, and you were trying to get those documents together, so why hasn't it been completed yet? I mean, we're only, what, 400,000 out of $8.4 million?
Yeah, so.
And this has been how many years, and you're not able to retrieve those documents? That's why I'm asking, does it exist?
Yeah, it does
Okay.
exist.
So let me go ahead and, so you're saying they all exist? They're all
exist.
accounted for,
Yes.
the full amount that, on reimbursement? How about Homeland Security? Do all the documents still, exist that you need to give to FEMA to retrieve the funding?
Senator, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. I cannot with confidence say that all the documents for Homeland Security grant programs exist. Finding those documents, or at least the attempt to try to find and locate those documents, is labor intensive. So it would require, probably me or an extra staff member to see what is kept at DOA or BBMR to retrieve the full documentation. But ma'am, I just cannot say with confidence that all the documents are available and necessary. I would have to look into that and see if we can find the documentation both at the Homeland Security Office and maybe at the depository where DOA and BBMR are located.
That's very helpful to find, because then we'll know exactly how much we can get reimbursed, what's not coming back to us that the general fund has to eat up. Are you familiar with investment justification? Are you familiar with that terminology?
Yes, but the investment
where is the work plan for that?
Yeah, so the investment justification is on the HSGP side. So
Okay.
we don't do investment justifications.
General, please.
Senator, that investment justification is embedded in the grant itself. And so when we receive notification of a grant being awarded, we receive a packet, maybe, 50 pages long, 80 pages long, depending on what the grant is. And built in that packet lies the investment justification, the project number, everything that FEMA has approved that we have requested for, that we're going to use the funding for.
Okay, so my question is, where is that work plan?
The work plan for the investment justifications?
Yes.
Ma'am, it is embedded in the work plan, in
Okay,
the
do you have
document
that
itself.
for the last grants that you had applied for? And then,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what about the 2023, I think it's the latest FEMA for 2023, 2022 grants? Have that been approved by FEMA yet? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think the 2022 is over. I'm sorry, it's 2023, 2024. So 2022 is already completed, and there's a grant out now for 2023, 24. Have you been approved by FEMA for those grants?
Yes, ma'am, we have.
Okay. So, okay, has FEMA seen the audit report? Have you talked to FEMA about this latest audit report?
No, we have not.
Have they seen it? Have you talked to your Region 9 and Bob Fenton with regards to that at Region 9? Has there been any conversation?
So, ma'am, to answer your question, have we spoken with our grants manager regarding this audit? The grants manager we work with is aware that the audits exist, which is why he is willing to work with us to address all the findings.
In these grants that were awarded to you, there are, certain requirements and what you're allowed and not allowed to do. And one of the things that I always thought was, how can you commingle the two grants together? Carry one, like the Homeland Security grant, carrying it over to the Civil Service, and the emergency one, to carry it over to Homeland Security. And I think there's basically a percentage that is only allowed to use for salaries. But if I'm not mistaken, one of the grants are clearly for equipment only and not salary. Is that true?
So that's the...
Because you guys were just saying earlier your salaries are covered, one is covered from that grant and another grant. And
so that's the nonprofit security grant program, which doesn't cover salaries, but now it does cover salaries. So they have what's called M&A.
I'm trying to stay on track, with the HS and EM grants that was audited. Let's just stay with those.
Yes, ma'am. So, I apologize. I see. Ma'am, in some of the grants, we can request for equipment, but we'd have to justify that in the investment justification. And then there's a certain percentage of that grant that would allow us to purchase a vehicle, to purchase supplies, to purchase training material. So it would depend on what grant it was. For example, our cybersecurity grant, first cybersecurity grant we had, allows us to provide training and education and sessions so that we can build a workforce. That's
okay,
just an
let's just
example.
stay on this grant, okay? Because if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned how you were able to use some of the funding for salaries. Well, I was particularly talking about one of these grants doesn't always allow for salaries, and if they do, there's only like a 50% allowance for it, but it's the commingling. Can you just answer that question? Are you allowed to use HS grant and the EM grant, together to cover?
Yes.
You're allowed to do that. Okay, you are under oath. Okay, just wanted to make sure. And during that time, when when the 22% raise came up, did you get the green light from FEMA in order to use the federal grants to receive this additional increase? Was there a request to FEMA allowing you for a 22% increase?
I was not here at the time. I do not know.
You weren't here at the time, okay.
Neither was I.
So do you know if it was done, though? I mean, you guys look at your past work, right, to try and make sure you don't make mistakes from the past, right? Have you?
I know
You're
whatever.
not familiar with that? Okay, then it's okay if you don't. I don't want to belabor this. Just let us know, let the chairman know, and as well as myself, if you can let us know about the 22% increase. I also noticed that your website, is really not up to date. We're still having other names there. So I appreciate you. I'm a stickler when it comes to websites, because if you want transparency and you want the people of Guam to know exactly what you're doing, you need to keep your website up and accurate and in real time. So every 2 years, about every 2 years, there's a desk audit that's done. And obviously, the last one, it failed. Is there another one that's supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, the one that's failed, it was last released in October 2024. And what was that? Oh, why don't I just ask that question? What was the result from the last desk audit that was done, finalized, and brought to you in October 2024?
So FEMA understands that the audit, the desk audit, and the Premier Group audit, and it's not desk audit, but the monitoring, were very close, and so the findings were about the same. FEMA is coming back out here in March to do another monitoring visit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because if I'm not mistaken, Premier just did it's just a partial audit, and I was just wondering if the next audit, do they plan to do a full-on forensic audit, FEMA, with Premier? Is that going to happen?
So FEMA has not mentioned the next audit schedule. The last audit they did with the Premier Group, the reason why the scope was as big as it was is because they were behind on their federal audit requirements because of COVID-19.
Okay, but Premier is just a partial audit. It wasn't like a full-on. That's what I'm talking. Are they planning on doing a full-on forensic audit?
I'm not tracking that it was a partial audit. I was tracking that it was the
in the Premier audit, it does say that.
It's a partial audit.
It wasn't full-on.
Yes.
Yeah, if you
Yes.
look at it.
So FEMA has not mentioned that they would have a subsequent audit at this time. They are doing monitoring in March, and this is because of the audit that they are doing this additional monitoring that they normally wouldn't do so soon. And so we're really thankful that they're doing the monitoring because it now gives us the ability to test some of the procedures that we put in place and some of the control measures. And so we'll be very happy to report out on that.
Okay, it was brought up earlier about a question I had with grants expiring and were not reimbursable, but that question was asked earlier. I just don't understand why grants that are expired are allowing to be reimbursed, especially with, you know, these audits are coming out doesn't really, I'm surprised FEMA's allowing you to extend it to, what is it, August, did you say, or?
It's an extension to the liquidation period and drawdown. Yeah. So the grant, the period performance is.
I'm sorry, what is the date this year, 2025 of what?
So for FY20 grants, 9/30/2025.
Right.
The end of the fiscal year is the last.
So October.
Month, yeah, we can draw down.
Okay.
Liquidity.
Okay. Does Homeland, does the HS grant or the EM grant cover the Homeland Security Network?
Yes, ma'am, it covers that, and it also covers the Mariana Region Fusion Center.
Okay. Is the security measures being met to those standards at this time?
Ma'am, could you clarify your question, please?
Is all the security measures being met to house the Homeland Security Network currently today?
Ma'am, the Homeland Security system that is located at the facility is currently temporarily disconnected, and it's just due to facilities issues.
Wow. Because of facility issues. Is that correct, General? Yeah.
Yes,
I just
ma'am.
sometimes
Yes,
say
ma'am.
echo in here. I really apologize.
Yes, ma'am. We're working with the DHS intel and analysis person.
Yeah, that's something I'm very concerned, you know, I'm just wondering why FEMA is not making a bigger stink about it. I mean, once upon a time, if I'm not mistaken, you had a 24-hour security at watch desk that was put in place. It stopped about a year ago. So I was kind of wondering why that stopped. And I'm just surprised FEMA, they took a look at your facility. You know, it has been neglected quite a bit. I'm surprised you guys haven't looked for grant money to kind of keep it up to par, basically. So other than that, that's all I have right now,
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator.
Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. And again, thank you for answering my questions. Look forward to reviewing your comments again more thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Chris Duenas, do you have questions for the panel on the first part of the report from the OPA?
Yes, I do. It's just Masi, Mr. Chairman, and certainly want to once again recognize the efforts of Senator Speaker Blas in really bringing this to light. And I just wanted to say that it's very clear. I do appreciate the discussion that we're here. The system works, albeit unfortunately the way we arrived there. However, we are here. So I want to go over a few things that I heard during the previous questions, which are very detailed. Starting with Director Byrne. Director Byrne, you mentioned that the external audit, essentially, it seems as though you're alluding to the fact that the non-external audit presentation, sort of, the way I took it away from your statement, that would have possibly created a red flag situation. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I think it's the other way around, Senator. The fact that we had a DOA internal audit, in my mind, should have alerted the external auditors to an issue. They maintain that the sums of money in each year, because that's how they determine materiality, wasn't sufficient for them to come up in their sample, as it were. I was saying to them, but we know there's something here, perhaps you should have a look at it. But that didn't happen, and it hasn't happened.
So I got my cart and my horse mixed up, but good enough. I was going where you arrived at because I wanted to ask the OPA. Is there a concern with that? It seems as though their internal audit might have been raising some flags, and I just want to, because I'm leading to one final question for the OPA, but is his statement, Mr. Burns' statement, that he almost feels as though the internal audit should have created a red flag situation. Is that something we missed?
It should have been. There are a couple of things. Though they did publish it on their website, it doesn't come out like our office does. They don't do a press release when they do theirs. That's the difference, is the internal audits done by the various autonomous agencies and the government agencies are not publicized. Yes, I agree with Mr. Byrne that the external auditors probably should have caught this, and there should have been mention of it in the audit for that year. I also understand the argument from the external auditor claiming that when you're dealing with a billion-dollar audit, 8 million or 2 million for that year is insignificant and is not significant enough to bring up. But if I'm aware of some of these things, I try to make sure that they include it in their audit. And I think we did it last year, finally. No. Oh, no, this 24 one should cover it because it's the 23. When we finally get this one, they better be mentioned. Yeah.
So I'm angling towards a solution-oriented line of questioning, as I said, because my colleagues had a very detailed overview of what the audit has presented. So I'll go to you next, Director Carlson. I'm concerned that the discussion with regard to the budgetary process, and when it was very clear, I think, probably for at least 3 to 4 fiscal years now, that the general fund was subsidizing what was otherwise federal grant covered reimbursement costs. Why didn't that, on its face and from what I'm seeing, why didn't that kind of spur a red flag as well, or did it?
You might find this hard to believe, Senator, but I was the last person to know.
Okay.
Sure, about what?
So I got to go back to Director Byrne then. Was the subsidy of Homeland Security and its operations without adequate reimbursement over several fiscal years something that was just a course of doing business because they obviously were not receiving the reimbursements for all the reasons stated in the audit?
Well, yes, I mean, I would partly agree with the external auditors that this, in each year, it wasn't a very significant sum or not a significant enough sum as to cause a major change in the accounting process. We have a very decentralized system. So getting the information that comes in from each agency, and the general fund also includes the DOE, the legislature, and the judiciary. Getting all this information into the audit that for local funds is getting on now for $1 billion. In each year, that amount would not have been really significant. Having said that, as I said, we were concerned about it, but it wasn't something that was going to necessarily cause a change. And there's been no audit adjustment proposed for the fact that in each year there was a charge to the general fund. In much the same way, I mean, we were aware of a charge to general fund for the the Healthy Futures Fund because it became much larger in one particular year.
I guess that's my next question. So the cumulative amount is certainly significant.
Yes, I agree. The cumulative amount is significant, but then you've got to put that in the background of probably $3 or $4 billion.
I hope, I mean, I understand the explanation, but I would pray that we don't ever take a position with regard to the millions of dollars that we're talking about here cumulatively in the grand scheme of things. I don't think we're saying that that's insignificant in any way, correct?
$1 might not be significant. I agree. We don't want to see these leaks in the system. And that's why we, at DOA, instituted the internal audit. And, you know, fortunately now we've got beyond that, right? Current grants are being reimbursed, so there's no further leaks. So to that extent, I guess it's been achieved.
Mr. Byrne, do you have any internal memo circulation with all these corrective action plans that have been proposed? And I have to say, I'm probably going to ask Charles Esteves about this. I'm a little concerned when I look at the audit and I look at the corrective action plans. These SOPs look to be standard. I mean, what's being proposed here, I got to say in my cursory reading and some detailed reading is, it's a do your job recommendation. Because other than hyper attention to this, Charles, I review this and this looks like standard operating procedures, even in corrective plans that are general operation requirements. Would you agree?
Yes, Senator, there are actions in there that should be part of standard duty position description, but the nuances are in the actual systems that FEMA uses, the very different systems they use. Sometimes we'll get administrative assistants with no AS400 experience. Still, they have the title of administrative assistant. It's a steep learning curve for people coming into agency who may be more on the human resources side of the house. They may be more on the fiscal side, which we really do need more people on the fiscal side. And so it's hit or miss when we do get administrative assistants coming in. And right now we have no administrative assistant. That's kind of been a revolving door of people over the years coming in.
So, Charles, and I'm going to have to go to management on this too. So then, I may have missed it. Would a corrective action be make sure you have qualified people to be able to execute your SOPs? Because that's what it's starting to look like to me. Or you're overweighted on an administrative capability of your staff and not properly weighted on those who actually have the competency to execute these, once again, as I said, items that look like a standard operating procedure as per grants management.
Yes, Senator, there's some items on there that are part of the duty description of an administrative assistant, but knowing what their skill sets are when we get these employees, that's something that we have to evaluate over time, evaluate during their first 90 days, 100 days there. And sometimes it requires them to receive remedial training on systems you would think that they would know how to use, such as the AS400.
Which is not even being used today. That'll be another.
It is actually still being used today.
So you have a parallel run going on?
So a lot of the financial data that we use, especially for our legacy grants, we are still pulling from the AS400. So we do use GIFMIS entirely, but we also still pull data from the AS400.
So, Mr. Byrne, there's not a full implementation. I know this is going off the track. I'll retract that because I'm going to have a hearing on that as well myself.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised to hear that.
So
I thought we were completely on the FIMS.
Yeah, Senator, it's implementation versus pulling data information, right? So we know, having worked in the AS400, that the data that we pull from there is correct, and sometimes there may be some migratory issues. So we just don't want to chance it, just for the legacy grants, right? We don't want to chance that there may be potential migratory issues. And then you also have to think that the staff, they're going through GIFMIS training for the different modules. Some of the staff went through the grants module about a month or two ago. so there's a learning curve there. But when we are looking for documentation, looking for transaction records for legacy grants, right, we're still going to pull from the S400.
If I could make it quite clear, Senator, through fiscal 23, we were on the AS400.
Right.
Fiscal 24 has been years divided. It's only fiscal 25 that will be wholly on the new system.
So as Charles was saying, is possibly research-based and getting that information, but it's in terms of operation, I got it. General, I want you to please discuss the issue, because this, as we talked about from the onset, even from the chairman, we are on a track for solutions. Do you concur with Mr. Esteves that the key issue here is you've got to ensure that your staff is properly weighted in their capabilities of HR management requirements as well as fiscal management?
Senator, yes to all. Not only do we agree on that philosophy, but we have also started identifying training, specific training, procurement training, AS400 training, grants management training that we would like for our current staff to have, get them to a point where we are in a steady state of operation, and then probably implement things like train the trainer so that that person who is trained can eventually train possibly a new employee that comes in. But the bottom line, sir, is that we have to have qualified individuals who know what they're doing, who can actually comprehend the complexities of grants management, to know the difference between an investment justification and a period of performance, and when those grants are due, someone who can follow just a system, a procedure. So I'm all with you. I'm in total support of what the administrator is doing, and we are endorsing training. We are doing everything we can to include ourselves train, because we don't want work to stop because there's not someone there to do the work.
So, Auditor Cruz, with my final question, you've mentioned this in the past before, so can you address this? And I'm going to ask you a direct question on, because of the situation we're currently in. I know you mentioned, like I said before, that with your auditors and others going and working with staff, you find competency issues across the board within the government of Guam, but particularly in this situation, it looks like it was quite in-depth. Also, Speaker Cruz, do you recommend that at this point in time that civil defense be under basically high-risk mandatory annual audit to make sure that we see this through?
We are following them up, and we will follow up with them. I have staff that sits in on the periodic meetings that we've had with FEMA in San Francisco. I sat in on a couple of them, and I'll probably sit in on the next one because it'll be a critique of the corrective action plan that was forwarded by Mr. Esteves and the General Aggie.
So you'll have eyes on this throughout the closeout, until closeout. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Jesse Lujan, do you have any questions for the panel on relative to OPA report part one?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Auditor Cruz, you were saying earlier that, of course, time is of the essence. What is that time frame?
As was mentioned by Mr. Esteves, it all depends on which grant you're talking about. It'll be probably 5 years from the date of the grant. So as he said, the 2019 grant expires, and the closeouts should all be done by the end of 24, and then 20 should by the end of 25, and just so it all depends on which grants they are, and the $8 million was over a period. This just wasn't just over the last couple of years. I mean, it's been going on for a while because, as Mr. Esteves mentioned, Civil Defense and Homeland Security has been on, I believe it's called reimbursement hold since 2018? Since 2018. So they weren't able to get reimbursement just by filing the reports, and they'll get their money back. There's been a hold since at least 2018.
So that being said, this is beyond a Houston, we have a problem call, but rather a Mayday call out. That's pretty accurate.
Yes, and I think the transition committees of both, two administrations have pointed out there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of this meeting, I'll set off the bomb. One of the things that everybody really needs to stop and talk about is the fact that everybody's talking about the competence of the staff. We've got to look at whether or not they're classified or unclassified.
And that would be my next question, because we spoke about this.
It's going to be, that's going to have to be the problem. In order to get continuity there, they're going to have to be classified staff. But I don't know whether it's you guys that set it up. Somebody's got to make that decision at some point, because being an unclassified staff that turns over with administrations or turns over when a director or chief of staff blinks or is in a bad mood and staff walk out, can't happen. It's got to be a classified service on meritocracy.
Yeah, and we spoke about that when we talked earlier. Basically, that the agency pretty much has transitory employees, pretty much. I'm very concerned about the fact that we have a new administration that's only, again, been inaugurated 3 days. And that we know that through executive orders and policies that we also know that FEMA will probably have a big shakeup with the Trump administration. I don't know I don't have how much confidence that the audit report that has been put out, if read by FEMA under a new administration, whether or not those grants will still be available for us based on the audits. What is your thought? Based on the 3 days of the Trump administration being in power and the decisions and executive orders that have been put out, if this audit were in front of his folks making decisions, what decision do you think they'll come up with?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Just before coming here, I was on my computer and listening to the news. President Trump was interviewed, and he said that they're talking about abolishing FEMA and letting the states handle their own disasters. Mm-hmm. And he leaned back and said, we're still talking about FEMA. So I don't.
And that's why I asked that, because we're talking about SOPs and all that, but it could be moot.
Well, no, an SOP is still necessary to keep
that
agency
in place, but I mean, in regards to the funding, we may have to take it upon ourselves, or the local government.
Yes, and please have an SOP in place with strict adherence once it's going to be just general fund.
Yeah. And likewise, again, your recommendation in regards to professional staff, and when I talk about not disparaging any staff that's there right now, but a continuity of staff, a classified staff that is not so much transitory, right?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah. I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Lujan. So we've finished the first round. I just want to check. I know that our speaker has a couple of questions, and I do want to allow for one more round, if you will, but I'll begin with the speaker first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And again, this is on the part one of the audit.
On part one. I just need to clarify, and Auditor Cruz, your report will focus on $8.4 million of costs or the costs associated with non-reimbursement from the government of Guam. What was the amount that FEMA had indicated in their audit as being questionable or unallowable costs? Do you remember that figure?
They corrected me, move closer. If memory serves me right, it's about $34 million.
So we're not just talking about $8.4 million, we're talking about $34 million.
Plus the 8.
Plus the 8. So 34 plus the 8 is now we're looking at $42 million.
Correct.
And of the $42 million, Mr. Byrne, you had stated that we've somehow managed to cover $400,000.
Before, the 34 is question cost. It's not been lost to us yet.
Yes.
But the recommendation from Premier was that if the two agencies cannot justify those expenses and FEMA makes a determination, FEMA can ask for reimbursement of that 34.
$34 million. And
so that's not lost yet.
Okay. And Mr. Carlson, you had basically assured that with regards to the questioned travel costs, which amounts to about $310,756 according to my DI math, because I broke his abacus. That's already been, that's a non-issue.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a non-issue.
Great.
We actually had to do a zip drive to be able to send it to FEMA. They acknowledged receipt of the documentation. So for me, that's...
So that's $42 million minus the $310,000.
Whatever the cumulative figure is, sir.
Yeah, the
right.
cumulative figure is the 310, is the $42 million. And I just wanted to make sure that part one is that. We were talking about, $42 million. Granted that the OPA, you're focused on 8.4, but that was cumulative, that was, again, other than. Auditor Cruz, can you explain when Premier came out with their audit report, FEMA audit report, they also provided a disclaimer of opinion. Do you recall as to what caused them to make that statement, disclaimer? And what is this disclaimer of opinion?
I'm not an accountant, and Mr. Burns can correct me if I misstated. But I believe, if memory serves me right, their disclaimer was the fact that because they could not get the documents from the two agencies, it was impossible to do an audit.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So there's the likelihood that, and granted that this was a random sample taken in various places for the audit, that this is conceivably more than $42 million. Auditor Cruz, I recognize that in your report, you further mention that actually the cumulative question cost for the findings was closer to $188,307,000. I'm just reading your report. You want to see it? It's on page 9. It's Premier Group Summary of Findings, page table 2. Can you explain what that number is? It's on the OPA report, Lester, not on the page 9 of the first report.
Can I get back to you on
Sure,
that one? But
sure. But, okay, you know, and so, let's go back to, you know, Ms. Aggie and Mr. Esteves. You both say that you are, Charles, you say you handle the EMPG, and Esther, you say you handle HSGP. But who is the state administrative agency? What agency acts as the SAA? In other words, who finally signs off on the dotted line?
For EMPG, that's myself, and then for HSGP, that's the HSA.
So they've separated that already?
Yes.
Although it's under one entity, DHS, they've separated the FEMA with the...
So Senator, on how the grants are separated, there's a portal, right? And it's
There's a
called,
portal, I understand the portal, but who basically is the final person?
For me, sir, for Homeland Security grant programs.
For both grants?
Well,
So for you,
For me,
it's-
it will be Homeland Security grants. I'm the authorizing official for Homeland Security grants, cyber grants, and nonprofit. And Mr. Esteves is the authorizing official for emergency management and hazard mitigation and tsunami.
And I bring this up because you stated that you're partially funded by HSGP and you're partially funded by EMPG.
No, sir, HSGP, the majority of my salary comes from the Homeland Security grant program, and a portion of my salary comes from the cyber security grant program.
I have staff that has 3 staff members that have a share with HSGP.
Yeah, okay, and so is that kosher?
Senator, it would depend on what the investment justification is, on what the actual project is. So
Okay.
for example, if I need a planner to plan for a missile attack exercise, and the planner is available on a classified employee is available to perform that work, then that employee would get a portion of his or her salary paid for by the Homeland Security grant.
Okay. Now, you know, Mr. Byrne, we recognize that we were talking about the internal audit earlier that you had conducted, and the differences as to why people didn't know what your internal audit would, you know, studied and what was studied by the OPA. But wasn't there a remark made in the internal audit that you made that a distribution was restricted and limited to just the affected agencies? Therefore, that's why it could not be. I'm not. You know. I just
Well,
want
what it says is that like any audit, that it's only for use by those that should be using it. However, we put it on our website.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to clarify. It's not to blame you for anything, but I just wanted to point that little
It's
thing out.
part of the internal auditors have a code, if you like, and it's part of that code that audits should be used only by those who have a reason to use it.
Okay. Which current program, grant program, is responsible for the facility, the maintenance of the facility that you occupy right now, that you both duly occupy right now?
Yeah, so now the facility maintenance is under the Office of Civil Defense.
So it's under the EMPG grant?
No, EMPG does not cover facility maintenance.
So how's it covered?
So we're working with the Office of the Chief of Staff to get funding for elevator maintenance, air condition maintenance, but that is not allowable in the grant.
Which goes to the concern that was brought up by my colleague, Senator Taitigui, with regards to the current conditions of the facility. Is your aircon working?
The aircon is back up and running.
Is your elevator working?
The elevator is working but needs to be inspected.
Is your backup generator working?
The backup generator is working with the exception of the automatic transfer switch.
Okay, so it's not working.
The generator works, but it won't automatically turn on. So the functionality during a storm is not good. If that's what you're getting at, sir.
And couldn't, no, when I left the facility, first off, how are you paying for the facility now? You kicked out 911 and everything, every other operation that was supposed to pay for your costs. So how are you paying for it now?
Through the grants.
Yeah, you just finished telling me you're not paying. You can't pay it through the grants.
No, we can pay for the power and water, but we cannot pay for the maintenance of the facility.
And you lost the ability to pay for that because you kicked people out.
So GPD was covering 12%, GFD covers 14%. But because GFD is still using it as their continuity of operations, they still provide us with a small cost share of utilities as their backup 911 center.
Okay, what about your fusion center?
So the fusion center is still fully operational.
And you said it is funded by how? How is that funded?
The salary for the fusion center director is funded by the Homeland Security Grant Program.
But you do have a fusion center related grant?
So the Homeland Security Grant Program covers the expenses for the fusion center.
But what about what you said you had a cybersecurity grant?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. What does that cover?
That covers training, Senator, training, education. We have yet to even draw down any funds from that grant. And despite us not being able to use any money, we already had a desk audit on it. Mm-hmm. And so we are in the process of working with our grants manager for cybersecurity to finally give us the go-ahead to establish an account so that we can start taking advantage of the money that's attached to that.
For the purposes of moving on, I'm just going to go one more thing that's really disturbing, okay? I mean, because Charles, you basically said you've got high turnovers, you're running, and people aren't being trained. I mean, they're not trained to be able to function in the positions they need to function in. Is that correct? Is that the statement that you made?
So when we lose staff, people have to take on additional responsibilities and duties.
Okay.
And so that requires, especially the classified staff, right? We have more unclassified staff than we do classified staff. Mm-hmm. And so when they have to take on additional grant duties or responsibilities, that requires additional training as well, understanding the programmatic side of the program. Now, what we're trying to do, and this is really difficult, is ensure that we have the common processes that everyone understands across all grant programs. And I can tell you that there are a lot of common processes, such as proper documentation of what you're doing for specific investment justifications on the HSGP side, or work plan items on the EMPG side.
Okay. Now, in your hiring, do you follow any process for classification of employees when it comes to pay scale, pay grades?
So what we do in the budget for the work plan or on the HSGP side, we do our best to match the position title with the classified pay scale.
Okay, that's interesting, okay, because let's go off the Part 1 report. Public Information Officer, $76,303,000. Civil Defense Coordinator, $60,500. Administrative Assistant, $67,278. Civil Defense Officer, $72,619. Administrative Services Officer, $92,108. Program Coordinator 3, $91,119. Planner 1, $68,855. Program Coordinator 3, $96,721. Administrative Assistant, $55,453. Grants Manager, $71,291. Program Coordinator 3, another Program Coordinator 3, is making only $62,000, $887. doesn't sit for me well if you're saying that you're just trying to say, you're trying to train up people and you got a lack of people knowledge in the area, yet we pay them a salary that should be commensurate with experience.
Yes, Senator, that's salary plus fringe.
What's that?
That's salary plus fringe, the amounts you stated, yes.
Plus fringe, okay?
Yeah.
Hence, you see where there's concern with regards to how we're spending the money and when, okay? And granted, that is focused on paperwork that has been missing. Let me go back again. Esther, when did you start with Homeland Security? Not just as the Homeland Security advisor, but when did you start working with Homeland Security?
So my first rodeo with Homeland Security was when I was in an acting capacity while I was still the Adjutant General, and I was detailed there to provide, just provide continuity until a permanent Homeland Security advisor was identified.
So when was that?
Senator, I believe it was towards the tail end of 2020.
2020. So it wasn't 2023. It was 2020.
Well, that was my first stint, Speaker, was when I came there as the acting until a permanent Homeland Security advisor could be identified. And then I started...
okay, so you did start in 2020?
In an acting capacity, sir, as a part-time. Yeah. And then in June of 23 is when I assumed the full-time role.
Okay. Charles, when did you start with Homeland Security?
2015.
2015. At what position?
Same, administrator.
Administrator.
Well, acting administrator.
Acting administrator. Yes. Okay. Last one. I remember there was last year we did have there was a bill that I introduced that basically says that maybe we should do comprehensive review, annual review of the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. Today I'm hearing that we need to do that. It's interesting that when we had the hearing, you said it wasn't necessary. What's the change in heart? What was the change of heart?
I think we're referring to SOPs versus the Guam Comprehensive Emergency Management
Understood.
Plan.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and
that the Guam Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan provides those processes to take care of overtime, to deal with, puts processes in place prior to an emergency. So what was the difference between it wasn't necessary back then to it's very necessary today?
Senator, if I may speak candidly, I think the sentiment was, there's no difference between the sentiment then and now. There's an urgency to do it now because of the changing threats, because of the positions that we hold.
And it's kind of interesting, Esther, because one of the things we want to do in emergency management is be proactive and not react to things. The biggest failure of emergency management is when you're given the chance to be proactive about something, and you let it go to now have to react to it. That's why we're in this position. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker. Let me go back through. Senator Chalari, you have any additional questions on the first audit? You're good? Hold on one second. No, I know. Hang on one second. Senator Salas Matanani, do you have any other questions? This is on the part one. Yes, please.
I was just kind of curious if the Guam State Clearinghouse has any involvement in overseeing your federal grants?
Yeah, so not these grants, because we are as Speaker mentioned, the state administrative agency for the grants. and so we manage our own grants.
And again, just to be clear, and so the viewing public understands in layman's terms, we're looking at $48 million or $42 million in question costs that could possibly have to be reimbursed. Yes or no?
8 that has already been lost, 34 that might be have to be reimbursed.
34 million. And then according to what Speaker Bloss mentioned earlier, it could possibly rise to 100? 188 million.
That's all the grants that have been received by both agencies over the decades.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Shelley Calvo, do you have any other questions on Part 1 of the OPA report?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. It seems like there's one employee to have been given the authority to have unchecked or over grant approvals, as you were mentioning, custody and accounting. What safeguards are being implemented to prevent this from happening again? You know, how did GHS and OCD allowed one employee to have unchecked authority over grant approvals, custody, and accounting?
All right, so this goes on to the second part of the investigative audit. So we'll go to an answer is, at one time we had an administrative officer, we had 2 administrative assistants, and so there was either a primary certifying official or a secondary certifying official. There is a primary timekeeper, alternate timekeeper. It's good depth there. But when you have these administrative assistants depart the agency for whatever reason, it left one person basically to do both the role as certifying and timekeeper, or at least inputting a timekeeper. Certifying official, by the way, is certification that funds are available. But prior to the audit, the secondary audit even being released, we've corrected any sort of issues regarding the duties or responsibilities that any one fiscal manager in the office has, and to separate and distribute the duties or responsibilities.
So that has been implemented
It's
already?
been implemented, yes. And this is prior to the audit being released. It's in our management report as well. Additionally,
Is it a recent implementation, or?
this was last year, I want to say October. Sorry, I have it here. Sorry, I actually had it in the slide on the actual timeline.
Yeah, if we can, we can get it
Okay.
done.
I was thinking, why were overtime plans not submitted or approved before the expenses were incurred as required by BBMR policies? Why is accountable for this? Who is accountable for this lapse?
Senator, if we can we allow if you have any other questions on this first audit, then we can definitely pick it up. Is it possible to hold off? Because he still has another presentation to give.
Oh, okay. So just moving forward, I just wanted to know what is the timeline for finalizing and implementing proper standard operating procedures to ensure compliance with federal and local regulations? That's all. That's my last question.
Senator, thank you for that question. We have already implemented some internal control measures to address your specific questions. So we didn't even wait for the audit to happen. We already implemented those control measures so that we can avoid situations as such.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tello, you have any questions on OPA report part 1?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And very short, I think. The emergency grant has a 5-year period of performance, and was any of the grant funding returned at the end of the period in 2019?
No, Senator. So it's a 3-year period of performance, but 5-year total federal appropriation. But no, the answer is no.
So in 2019, nothing was returned back?
Nothing. Yes.
On the emergency grant?
Return back, no. I'm not tracking any funds returned to FEMA.
Okay. In your building, is it ADD compliant?
Senator, when everything works, it is ADA compliant.
But it's not ADD compliant right now, right? The question was very simple. Is it ADD compliant today?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. And the last time, if I'm not mistaken, the Fusion Group, they meet like every day. And there are certain members of the Fusion Group, right? Is any of those members been missing from the meetings?
Senator, is this a question on the first part of the report? Can you help us?
Yeah, it's
because
part
we're about
of
to get to his presentation on part 2.
Yeah, it's part of the audit, because the federal government, when they're issuing out any kind of grant, there are certain qualifications that are needed to follow these grants, and one of them is the Fusion Center, which is funded by the Homeland Security grant. And if they don't meet with the Fusion Center or have a proper group that are attending, like GPD, for instance, I'm hearing they're no longer part of the Fusion Center, so your group has not been really meeting in compliance of these grants.
Okay,
so that's my question.
Okay, so can you please answer that question relative to the first part of this audit?
Sure. Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. So ma'am, recently, just like how our duties were divided up into 3, and so, you know, Mr. Estevez, he is responsible for all emergency management grants, and then I am responsible for Homeland Security grants. So part of that move actually designated the Mariana Fusion Center director to just answer directly to the chief of staff. And so I no longer have supervision over that Fusion Center director. So ma'am, I can't answer your question adequately because I don't see them.
Do you attend those meetings?
No ma'am, I am not invited to those meetings.
Okay, do you attend those meetings at the Fusion?
No, I'm not a member of the Fusion Center.
Okay, so you have nothing to do with the Fusion Center, but however, you have a grant that oversees that, correct? The grant oversees the makeup of this Fusion.
Not for my grants. No.
Not from your grants? How about Homeland Security?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
It does. And if I'm not mistaken, that it's short a member, a really critical member, Guam Police Department is part of that group. So I don't know how FEMA is continuing to provide any kind of funding when you're missing someone there. I mean, it has a lot to do with the building and why it's not ADD compliant. So moving on, my last question. You know, Esther, I have to ask you again about the 22% that we, you know, asking FEMA before giving the 22% increase to the employees, that FEMA was notified of this. And I asked the both of you, did you know of the 22% increase if somebody requested for it? And you both said no to me. But I have a document here showing that your signature was on the GG1s for the increase of the 22%. And earlier, you both said to me that you had no idea of this. So I'm just asking you one more time. Did you know about the 22%, and was FEMA notified of this increase?
So ma'am, I knew about the 22%, but I don't have any recollection if the grants manager was asked if that was an allowable expense on the Homeland Security grant.
You signed your name on it.
On the GG1.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, so how this works, Senator, is in order for the grant to pay for anything, you have to get permission from a grant. They have to repurpose, or they'll agree that, okay, if this is what you're asking for, let me do the research, let me get back to you whether I approve it or not. Wow. And if I may, ma'am, I also like to, if I can, just add on to the Fusion Center. So the director's salary is paid out of the Homeland Security grants. However, the analysts that are assigned there still get their salaries from their respective agencies, to include GPD.
Yep. but it's still funding that's given to him. So you signed your name to a GG1 to authorize the 22% increase for this individual without knowing whether FEMA was notified or asked. No, so like you said, you do it first and then you ask FEMA later. Is that what you just mentioned? That's what you just said.
No, ma'am. That document was probably signed when I was in an acting capacity while Sam Brennan was on leave, and that document just arrived, and it had my signature on it, but Sam Brennan was the Homeland Security Advisor at that time.
But you did sign it, right?
I signed a GG1.
I don't know about you, Esther, but anything I sign, I make sure I do my research before putting my name on anything, regardless if it's for somebody else or not. So I just wanted to make it clear that about the GG1s or the 22%, that you were aware of it. So I just wanted to correct that for the record, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We need to reset the our AV side, so can we take a 5-minute break, and then we are going to pick up on part 2, and if we can, when we come back, we'll pick it up with Mr. Esteves's presentation, and then we'll continue. So just take a 5-minute break, and so we can reset on the AV side. Thank you.